is provided by Sonoma Paint Center, located at 815 West Napa Street. For more information, you can go to sonomapaintcenter.com. And Larbury Automotive, located at 18155 Sonoma Highway. For more information, you can go to larburyauto.com.
I would like to call to order, wow, this is loud, the September 6, 2017 regular meeting of the Sonoma City Council. Mr. Abadili, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? All please rise.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen.
Thank you. Ms. Clerk, can I have a roll call, please?
Yes. Councilmember Cook?
Here.
Councilmember Harrington?
Here.
Councilmember Agramonte? Here. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards?
Yes.
Mayor Hundley?
Here.
Thank you.
Item 1, comments from the public. At this time, members of the public may comment on any item not appearing on the agenda. It is recommended that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Under state law, unless otherwise permitted under the Ralph M. Brown Act, the merits of the matters presented under this item cannot be discussed or acted upon by the City Council at this time. For items appearing on the agenda, the public will be invited to make comments at the time the item comes up for council consideration. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. Ken Brown, 1396 Lubeck Street in Sonoma. Pleasure to be here. I attended the DACA rally before coming, and it was a good turnout and behaving respectfully, and just makes you realize how special the plaza is that allows its citizens to use it in that fashion. I just want to say thank you to the city manager and the council for placing medicinal cannabis and delivery and all assorted items on the agenda for next Monday. I'll be here for sure, and I'm truly, truly looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Frank Wines, W-I-N-D-E-S, 2003 Denmark Street. In the last few weeks, I have faced 2 emergencies. The first was a call from my daughter at about 7:30 in the morning. Close friends of hers were evicted that morning. Family of 6, they were renting, and they were having a terrible time finding a house that would accept 4 kids. Would you take them in? So after a few weeks of having a family of 6 living with me in my 3-bedroom house, they finally did find a house that was big enough for them. And a couple of weeks ago, they moved out. And I thought, whew, this is great. The next morning, a friend showed up at my door. She and her daughter were living in the car. The daughter was in school. How in the world was she going to do homework sitting in a car? Would you? So I still have a family of two living with me. And I tell you this because this is not rare. This is common in our community. And we really need to have stuff done. This woman with her daughter is trying to find a place to rent with her Section 8 housing. And each place she goes costs her $35 on a cashier check of some kind in order to get a security check done on her. And the next place, same thing again. There's stuff that this city could do to provide a single place to deal with this kind of thing, so a person doesn't have to pay $35 every time when they have almost no money. So I ask you, please, give some serious consideration to declaring a housing emergency for the workforce people that need to live here in our wonderful community to support our businesses. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave Ransom. I live in Santa Rosa. I go to church in Sonoma, Sonoma United Methodist. I'm almost sorry to be here today. The Spiritual Action Group, the Sonoma Valley Housing Group, has been coming before you for more than 2 years now, and the housing situation hasn't gotten better. It's gotten worse. There will be a national Renters Week of Action and Education starting on the 18th and going through the 22nd, and we would like to re-up this question for the City Council and other parts of government for that time, in that time. So we'll be back that Monday. To put things in context, here's part of an article from today's San Jose Mercury. As home prices and rents soar to unthinkable levels, California lawmakers are working furiously to drum up the votes for a package of bills they hope will help contain the spiraling affordable housing costs. But as of Tuesday afternoon, the only bill that would create a permanent funding source for affordable housing, Senate Bill 2, was still short of the votes it needed to pass. Every member of the legislature knows that we're in the midst of the most intense housing crisis that California has experienced in our state's history, and that we have to act, Assemblyman David Chu, Democrat of San Francisco, said Tuesday. Hopefully, in the coming days, we'll be able to take these up for a vote, but these things often take a little bit longer than we hoped. In the 9-county Bay Area, homes are in such short supply that the median price for a single-family home has topped $800,000. And nearly 1/3 of renters statewide, 1.5 million households, spend more than half their income on rent, according to state estimates. You can imagine if it's statewide, it's more than half. It's 1/3. In Sonoma, it's going to be higher. The alarming trend has caused evictions and homeless encampments to proliferate, and runaway housing costs have put unprecedented pressure on middle-income residents as well. Now, I see my time is coming up, so I'll skip down to the bottom. Senator Tony Atkins of Democrat of San Diego says, if we don't get started in a serious way, we will have more than a crisis on our hands. We will have a humanitarian crisis of proportions you have never seen. A humanitarian crisis is a political crisis, and political crises get solved. With next year's elections coming up soon, we are asking you, once again, to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. We'll be back again in 2 weeks to mark the Renters Week of Action and Education with specific suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. It's me again. Linda Corrado, First Street East. I gave you all a packet, And this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart, because I have to live it every day. And I personally want us to take charge of our town and not pedestrians and tourism taking charge of us. And I think it's important to welcome tourism, welcome everybody who comes to visit our town, but it is a growing problem. And just coming here tonight, a woman did a catty-walk right between the cars and went from the middle of the square right to the corner and stopped 3 cars right in the middle of the crosswalk. And it's getting worse. So if you look at the first page, I am recommending a roundabout of sorts and creating one-way traffic around the plaza, 2 lanes going around in one direction. Parking will not change. All you have to do is change the striping. And the inner lane goes around the plaza. The outer lane is the yielding oncoming and incoming traffic. So in drawing this, I never drew something like this before. And so my artwork, please don't look at it. There's a couple of crooked lines. I researched how to draw a traffic pattern online and found the article about Savannah, Georgia, where the square can do better than the roundabout. And it speaks ad nauseum about the benefits in Savannah, Georgia, of having the one-way traffic around the square. So I would like to propose that we look at this, and I know that there's some obstacles that need to be overcome. The second page is I would like to put blinking lights in the crosswalks, and I would like on the third page to have a signal for pedestrian traffic. And in the summer months on the weekends to have it timed, and that pedestrians cross. When the lights go off, the pedestrians cross and traffic stops. And when the lights go off and the pedestrians stay and the traffic moves and they don't go into the crosswalk. And I think this would help the flow of traffic go around the square immensely. Now, I know Caltrans is going to be an issue on something like this, but I would prefer the approach that we go to them and say Sonoma first and get the community behind us and say, would you work with us and do what you can to make this happen? So that is my proposal. Thank you. And I did it again.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I want to thank you for the waiver.
Could we get your name and your address first?
Yes, my name is Alejandra Cervantes. I'm the executive director and founder of Nuestra Voz, 200 Fuente Lane, Spring Village, in Sonoma. I want to thank you for the waiver of the celebration of Mexican Independence Day, and it will be an honor for us if you join us to celebrate. So I have a poster for you to share with the community, and so an invitation for the community to join us on the September 17 from 2 to 7 to celebrate Mexican Independence Day. Thank you again.
Thank you. And you can actually pass them that way and then we'll get them. Thank you so much.
Hello, JJ Abadili. I live on Ingram Drive. Here to talk about the First Street East project today. So when this project kind of first came to be, and the opportunity that we saw was really focused around the idea that this was a mixed-use zone property, and that there was a great opportunity to develop it in a way that helps Sonoma the most, and met several different goals. Our initial hope was to help reduce some of the burden that we see daily from day trip heavy tourism, focusing on some higher value overnight tourism by generating potentially millions of dollars of TOT tax in perpetuity, revenue for the city that at the same time can also bring smart housing to our town, which we all agree that we need. We believe that the plan that we had previously submitted achieve those goals, and we still do. But fast forward 2.5 years, Sonoma's housing crisis is worse than ever. Some hurdles involved in getting the commercial elements approved of this project and any other, for that matter, are holding it up, and which meant that we were holding up housing. And at the end of the day, we weren't making the progress that we felt like we needed to do on that front. So we took a step back. We really kind of started where we started, which is what's the best thing for someone on this site. And today the answer is housing. So we decided to drop all the commercial components of the project and focus on housing. So we're very grateful for the support that we received over the last 2 years as we attempted to navigate the project through the planning process, from the citizens to the local officials, planning commissioners, worked to provide feedback on multiple occasions, which we appreciated. We've had many citizens stop us on the street, send us emails, talk to us, write letters of support, and we're appreciative of that as well. You all, the City Council, has been responsive to our requests to work together to bring more housing to Sonoma in a more streamlined fashion, in a more quick fashion, with more clarity, and we look forward to continuing this work with you in the weeks and months ahead. We're excited to bring forth options for a development plan that's all housing. We hope you will join us in supporting New Direction, being solution-oriented and removing roadblocks to bring more housing to Sonoma. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gina O'Neill, Protect Sonoma. Today is a good day. It's great. Thank you to the developers for changing their plans. Thank you to the community of Sonoma, almost 1,000 people that joined Protect Sonoma to stand up for what they believed in, to do what was right for Sonoma. Thank you to all the people that are on my group that stood up for what they believed in, even if it meant suffering some consequences. Thank you for everyone who was willing to hear our arguments and to agree with us that this site is ideal for housing. We really welcome this, and we really welcome a fresh start with the developers to work together to create a project that in the end will serve Sonoma, serve our citizens, and then in the end we will all be proud of, and it will outlast all of us. And I look forward to putting something together and working cooperatively on a program that we can all skip down the street and be happy about. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comments?
It's been a long day.
It's only
My name is Rebecca Boddington. I live on 417 Brazil Street. This is Phoebe, Phoebe Boddington. I am one of the appellants on an appeal for a development on 4th Street at East and Brazil Street. And so that's, I think, going to be coming in front of you guys soon. And I just wanted to let you know that, and I think we'll be reaching out to you folks individually just to share with you some of the neighbors' concerns, questions about that development. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Hunley, maybe if the close of public comments, I just have a few updates.
Okay. Is there any further public comment at this time? Seeing none, I will close it, and I will pass it to our city manager.
Great. Just, I wanted to speak briefly about Mr. Brown's comment about cannabis. So I just wanted to, we are going to be having a community workshop next Monday, and it'll be a community workshop on cannabis. So just wanted to outline for council and community early in the meeting while folks are watching. The meeting will be here in the council chambers. We'll have a series of different panel speakers. And the purpose really is to provide the council with information and the community about a variety of changes and both issues, constraints, and opportunities the council has to explore related to cannabis. So we will be providing an overview about state regulations. We'll be talking to council and the community about the current status of our regulations and also what's occurring in Sonoma County, kind of just right outside our boundaries. And we will have a consultant who is working with cities across the state and has some expertise also from Utah to provide some background and to answer questions. We also have some information about what your peer agencies and peer councils are doing in Marin and Sonoma and Napa, some context. We'll hear from our local law enforcement, and then we'll be laying out, based on our local community profile, what are the different license types that the council and the policy options that council will be looking at. So I would call this kind of Cannabis 101. It's kind of a first, some of the key general information that council and community needs to understand as we look at, you know, what council needs to do moving into 2018 when the state will be putting in regulations. So just wanted to take an opportunity to communicate kind of the structure and the process about that community workshop. And then just also wanted to speak to Mrs. Parato's comment and ideas about traffic flow. The city does have a traffic safety study we're doing at about 20 different intersections. And the plaza and all the plaza intersections will be looked at. And so that is a project that we're consulting, working on a report, and probably coming back late fall, early winter, and we can have some different conversations. So just wanted to let folks know some of that is in process. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, do we have any meeting dedications?
I would like to dedicate this meeting to all of the dreamers we have in Sonoma and California. I think we have the most of the entire country here, especially in Los Angeles, and there is a really great rally that happened today on the square. It's probably still going on, a show of support for our community. That's it.
Thank you. And I would also like to dedicate it to all of those who were affected by Hurricane Harvey and those that are preparing for Hurricane Irma, which includes my dad. No presentations tonight. Item number 4 is approval of the agenda. If there's any discussion or maybe an action by the council. Someone would make a motion to approve our agenda.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the agenda.
Yes.
Second.
All right. Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Harrington?
Aye.
Councilmember Braganti? Aye. Mayor Pro Tem Edwards?
Yes.
Mayor Henley?
Aye.
Thank you.
And that was a new thing we're still getting used to, seeing that one on here. Item number 5 is our consent calendar. All items listed on the consent calendar are considered to be routine and will be acted upon by a single motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless members of the council, staff, or public request specific items to be removed for separate action. At this time, council may decide to change the order of the agenda. Any council questions or items to be pulled? Seeing none, I will take it out to the public for public comment. Seeing none, I will bring it back to the council for action.
If there are no comments or questions, I would move to approve 5.1 and 5.2.
Second that.
Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Harrington?
Aye.
Councilmember Braganti?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Edwards?
Yes.
Mayor Henley?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. No items on the public hearing today, so we'll skip to 7, regular calendar. Item 7.1 is consideration, discussion, and possible action regarding the city's position on proposed 2017 League of California Cities Annual Conference resolutions. And we will turn it over to our city clerk.
Sorry, go ahead. We'll go ahead and start with city clerk, and I may add on, and then we've got both Chief Sackett and Chief Aker here too.
Special guest.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This next week, the majority of the council will be attending the League of Cities Annual Conference in Sacramento. And part of that conference every year is the General Assembly on Friday afternoon. What happens at that time is any resolutions that the member cities have put forward will be considered after much vetting through a process throughout the week. It starts at the policy committee that it's been assigned to by the president of the league. Then it goes to the General Resolutions Committee for consideration of the policy committee's consideration. And then it goes to the General Assembly on Friday. At a recent meeting, we had designated Mayor Hunley, or you designated Mayor Hunley as our voting delegate to represent the council at that meeting. So tonight's meeting is to, or the discussion is to go over the 2 resolutions that were received and to either choose to support, oppose, or not take a position. So you can give that direction to Mayor Hunley so she can present that at the meeting. The 2 resolutions that were presented and We have the chiefs here tonight, but they're both in the law enforcement, so they were both considered by the Public Safety Policy Committee. And those were, the first resolution was implementing strategies to reduce negative impacts of recent changes to criminal laws. And resolution 2 was local control for emergency medical response. With that, I will turn it over to Kathy.
Yes,
Assistant
thank
City
you.
Manager.
Thank you, City Clerk. I just wanted to, I think in terms of process, it would be helpful, just a few other things. One, the League of California Cities, it is the annual conference, but I just wanted to add on, the League of California Cities is basically a membership organization that cities throughout the state belong to. I think 98% of the cities belong. And so this league does both advocacy and policy, research, education, and training. And so this is one piece of that kind of policy advocacy conversation. The information that is put together is put through the various policy committees, and I asked the chiefs to be here, not that they can represent what has gone through the league process, but there is local context and implications of some of these issues that I thought it would be helpful to have each of them just to, in general, what are the issues that we have experienced in these public safety arenas. You have some local context as you look at the language that's in front of you and give direction to Mayor Hundley in terms of how to vote. So I would recommend we start with a resolution number 1, finish that one first, and then move to resolution number 2. So with that, I'll maybe ask Chief Beckett to briefly talk a little bit about how what Sonoma has seen with some of these issues, and then council can ask questions. We can go to public comment, Mayor, and then come back for any council action, then we'll take the other one. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's first?
Thank you, Mary Hundley and members of the council. Thank you for an opportunity to speak before you this evening regarding the resolutions. I have had a chance to read the resolution, not only forwarded to me through the city clerk, but also I received it through the California Police Chiefs Association. Their executive policy team sent it to us for review as well and support. So a little bit about kind of history. It may be a little bit of a repeat because I came before you not too long ago for our annual report, and I kind of identified 3 of the areas that are really addressed here in terms of the fact that in the last 5 years, there's been really sweeping legislation and changes to the criminal justice system like I've never seen in my 27-year career. First and foremost, in 2011, we passed AB 109, which in essence required state prisons to reduce their population by 45,000 convicted felons. And so the way they did that was to push most of those back into the local county jails from which they came from. And so as a result of that, Sonoma County Jail has seen a significant increase in the number of former prison populations who are sitting in our county jails, some of them for quite some period of time. And so the impact that we see locally on that is the fact that there's just quote unquote no room at the inn. So people who are local minor offenders simply don't have space to put them into the county jail. They get released quickly and they're back in the community, oftentimes re-offending. And so that's been a significant impact that we have seen since 2011. In 2014, the voters passed Proposition 47, which was called the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act. However, according to some people, instead of keeping our neighborhoods safe and our schools safe, it actually did was to reclassify many prior felonies into misdemeanors. And the idea behind that was, of course, if you're not charged with a felony, you can't be convicted to go to state prison. You stay in the criminal justice system locally. Unfortunately, many of the crimes that were declassified included drug possession, gun theft, possession of date rape drugs, for instance. And we think that the effects of 47 has been kind of far-reaching. Just as an example, we've seen it in our community. People who are perpetual thefts or thieves can steal at any given time, $950, used to be $400, but $950 on a repeated opportunities, and they aren't really held accountable and no aggregate of it, so they continue to either get a citation because there's no room to put them in jail, or they simply are not prosecuted because there's just no room to do it. In addition, when the drug offenses were reclassified to misdemeanors, it didn't take long for the criminal community to understand that if I don't have a felony sitting over my head, there's no real incentive for me to agree to go into court-ordered drug rehabilitation. And so they've seen, from what I understand, the people in the profession who run drug treatment programs, they've seen a significant decline in enrollment in drug treatment programs, which oftentimes is one of the underlying reasons why people are committing crimes. And then the last change was Prop 57, which passed in 2016. And Prop 57 was called the Public Safety and Rehabilitation Act. However, what that did was also make up to 30,000 state prison inmates eligible for early release by reclassifying some of their crimes also. And some of those are basically by saying these are non-violent offenders. But one of the problems is they only look at their last offense. They don't really look at their history of criminal behavior over a course of time. And so some of those things that were reclassified as non-violent, which again would be open to interpretation, each individual person, would be rape by intoxication, rape by an unconscious person, human trafficking involving sex acts with minors, drive-by shooting, assault with deadly weapons, hate crime causing physical injuries, etc. So those are some of the offenses that make people eligible for early release. And according to the DA's office, they have had numerous petitions for people to come get out on early release. So those three major changes, I think, have had an impact on us locally. And I reported in 2015 in my annual report. Again, Sonoma is small, right? And so numbers can fluctuate from year to year. But in 2015, we did see a 9% increase in violent crime. We also saw a 33% increase in property crime, including 44% increase in theft. That was the year that they declassified a lot of the crimes from misdemeanors or felonies to misdemeanors. In 2016, which is after Prop 57, where we changed again classifications of certain crimes, including a lot of them that deal with rapes. We saw an increase of 16% in our violent crime, and surprisingly, a 350% increase in the number of reported rapes. Property crime did fall that year by 4%. So, but burglary was up 15% that year. So I think overall, I mean, I'm not in a position to say that, these numbers are cyclical. I think I reported that they were within our, they were a little higher than our three-year average, but they weren't necessarily out of the norm. But certainly something that has been concerning to me, and I think concerning the people who work in the police department. So that is basically a rundown of how I think it impacts us locally, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if you had some.
Thank you. Do we have any questions at this time? Ms. Harrington.
Oh, I just want to be clear on Prop 57. They can be eligible for parole, but their parole is reviewed by the parole board. It's not mandatory, right?
That's correct.
All right, so this time, are we going to discuss vote on one and then we'll go to the second one? Is that what you're recommending?
Because we're going to split it like that, I think you need to take public comment on each of them. Or if you can discuss it, if you want to discuss it, and then hold your vote to the very end and do one public comment.
Because I do have comments. I don't know if you're taking.
Well, so then we'll have our one public comment, but we can have a little talking now, and then we aren't going to vote yet. Do number two, same thing,
Perfect.
Public comment, final discussion, vote. So this time, if we have comments on this one, let's hear it.
That'd be great. So thank you so much, Chief, with respect to this. I've served on the Public Safety Committee many years ago, and I was very proud to do so. And but there's some things, I felt that there were a lot of theatrics in this resolution for obvious reason. I think the facts that you've shared are true. Having heard from friends in law enforcement in San Francisco, I think their sales have gone up on flashlights because everybody's breaking into cars and they just walk up and down the streets and break into the cars. Here's my only issue, and I think you've done a good job explaining some of that. On page 6 of the resolution, it's the first from the bottom and the third from the bottom, and I'll start with the third from the bottom. Whereas incentives for offenders to voluntarily enroll in substance abuse programs have diminished, which has had the effect of eroding the safety of our communities. And I heard what you shared with us. I cannot believe there are actually substance abuse problems there. This whole state of California says that they don't have funds for that. The first one from the bottom, whereas many probationers who have severe mental illness are released into communities where they continue to commit crimes that adversely affect the safety of our community members and so on. We still don't do anything about mental illness, and that's not law enforcement's fault. We fall short on what we do here. What I did notice that there are letters from different cities, which I find great because it's the League of California Cities, but none of them are represented on the Public Safety Committee. I don't know why they haven't done that. As far as I can tell, I tried to read through all of these. On page 7, you know, some of this for me is theatrics. I find it hard to, I just find some of these things hard to believe, and I think what is being done is to present these horrible crimes to all of us, so we'll just kick in and say, yes, this is good. We have a lot of problems, obviously. I'm not going to include law enforcement because we don't take our responsibility here in this state on mental illness or drug treatment programs. A lot of the clean and sober houses are not really clean and sober. We never register those homes. There are no requirements. You just find a few buddies and they open up a clean and sober house. And, you know, people become very wealthy doing that. So those are my only objections. I will support it because of you all. But I just want to know, I'm not satisfied with the way it was written, and maybe it'll go through a lot of changes as it works its way in. Having served on the Public Safety Committee, I was very proud to be part of a lot of what we did, and that's really the only reason I would support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Harrington?
Oh, I also, I don't think I support this resolution. I think that it's been very clear that our state prison system is overcrowded, and I was just recalling that a federal judge had to appoint a receiver because people were dying in prisons in 2005, that we simply don't have the room or the resources to incarcerate all these people, and other options are going to have to be found because we cannot afford and we do not have the ability to imprison all these people. We just can't do it, and we're going to have to look for other ways around that, and it is very difficult. Certainly, anyone familiar with the heroin problem can see that people are shooting up all over the place, like in San Francisco. It's out in the open because it's not, you know, there's no fear of consequences for that. But the solution has not worked to criminalize people, and all of the problems we do have, for example, with the mental health system, are being dumped on jails, and they're not equipped to handle that. And so this is a blunt tool for a delicate problem, but it's at some point we have to start saying we can't just take all the people that have problems in our society and throw them in jail. We're going to have to find some other solutions. So I would support other solutions that were going to address the underlying problems of why people are in these positions, but I don't think increasing the number of people that are incarcerated is the actual ultimate solution.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Mr. Edwards?
So I am going to support it. I think it's time for a reset, and I agree that prisons are full of lots of people that maybe shouldn't be in prison, but then, you know, some of the federal prisons are country clubs, because we've had some local folks in Sonoma that lived in federal prison for a while and became gardeners and golfers and other things. So I'm going to support this, and I just think it's time for a reset. And hearing some of the statistics, I abide by the law, and I expect everyone else to. And I respect it. Thank you.
Mr. Cook?
I was going to wait until after we went through the resolution, but I will be supporting this resolution. I do believe, like Council or Vice Mayor Edward said. I think we need to do a reset. I'm a little hardcore when it comes to incarceration. I believe that it's something that in our society, having individuals out there that commit crimes, they need to do the time, and I think it's the responsibility of the government to figure that out. I do like local control. I would like to see the funds come down to the local level, to take care of the problem, but it sounds like that's not what's happening. But hopefully through a little bit of a dialogue, hopefully we can come to some kind of consensus to figure out a different way. So what Councilmember Harrington said, I do agree. When you read between the lines, it is time that we do look at the mental illness and the other things. I mean, it's I have a lot of friends who I talk to, especially in the business that I'm in, and I understand the hardships out there with alcoholism, drug abuse, and I would just like to see the dialogue open.
And I will not be supporting this. I do think that of the propositions mentioned, obviously there's fine-tuning that needs to be done, but I find the focus of this too narrow, and I think that there's going to be a task force on it. It needs to be more comprehensive, particularly in regards to mental health, and so I would prefer them, widen it a little bit, where this is definitely focused on sort of putting bodies back into prisons. So, are there any more comments on this one? So then we will go to resolution number 2.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, staff, and community. Thank you for the opportunity as well to speak to a resolution that is brought by the League to actually speak to something that Councilmember Cook, you just spoke in favor of, which is local control. And this issue, I think, is something that essentially what the resolution is asking to support is for local jurisdictions, local fire and EMS providers to be able to determine what the appropriate level of response is for a local community, based on what the community's expectations are, based on what the community's resources are, and that should be a decision that the League is advocating for, as well as groups like the California Fire Chiefs Association, the Sonoma County Fire Chiefs Association. We advocate that that's something that your professionals that are providing you guidance and recommendations on emergency services response, they're the ones that should be allowed to provide that guidance and those recommendations, not someone in an administrative position higher up in the either county or the state. So this is something that we're very heavily involved in, both at the local level here in Sonoma Valley as well as on the county level. The county fire chiefs actually stopped an EMS ordinance that was being brought through at the county level for these very concerns that are raised in this resolution, and that is the local control, the ability of us as the fire and emergency service providers here in the city of Sonoma and Sonoma Valley to determine what the appropriate level of response is. So we actually, through some advocacy, we were able to stop that process, and we are now starting a new process to craft an EMS ordinance that is collaborative and that is an open, transparent process, and it allows us to consider the needs of a variety of providers, and all with the ultimate goal of providing the best service to the public. So I've been actually appointed by the Sonoma County Fire Chiefs Association to be the lead representative for fire service agencies within that process. So we're working with the county to start that and hopefully address some of these issues of ensuring that we have local control over what kind of resources and what level of response we have to specific emergencies within our local areas. This does have some background that is very profound. This came out of San Joaquin County and Tracy, where the local EMS agency at the county level implemented a new system of level of responses that took fire first responders out of the system and were just sending ambulances. met with some very, very poor outcomes, a lot of it attributed to those decisions. There's a lot of factors that go into an emergency response and how an emergency is reported, how it's classified, and there's a lot of changes that can happen within that process. And the most appropriate level of service that we believe is what we currently do. We send a fire first responder and we send an ambulance to any medical emergency. And we feel that that's something that we've recommended and the policymakers have certainly implemented, and we want to keep that. The last thing to really bring it home to us here with the city is the fact that we not only provide our first responders to the engine companies to medical emergencies, but we also provide the EMS transport. We provide the ambulances. And our system is so dependent on being able to provide both. We have the dual role personnel. We have firefighters and paramedics that staff the engines and the ambulances. We've been fighting for the recognition of this right to provide this level of service basically since the city of Sonoma took over Norbomb's ambulance back in the late 80s, early 90s. There was a court case that the city successfully fought, both the county and the state EMS agencies, to be able to provide that exclusive service and not be under threat of a private operator coming in and taking some of those revenues away from our system that the taxpayers in the city have funded. It's a big investment. But even with that court case, we've still not been able to get that recognition at the county level within the EMS ordinance that Sonoma Valley is an exclusive operating area. So recently, a private provider was allowed to come into Sonoma Raceway, and that took away a little bit. It was not significant, but was able to take away a little bit of revenue that we had historically provided. We had provided service to. So that's a really big part of why why I've been willing to be in such an involved role in this crafting of a new EMS ordinance. It really does allow us, having that revenue allows us to provide the service that we do to the community. And it's an exceptional service. We're able to provide the best service we can, both for EMS and for fire response, due to this system and due to anything that we can do to help solidify that right, that local control, is helpful in this process. So I would strongly encourage your support of this resolution.
Steve, just one other thing. Can you add and just remind council how much an annual EMS revenue comes to the city?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Our EMS revenue on average over the last few years is between actual revenue and reimbursements is right around $2 million.
This time, do we have any comments on resolution number 2? First, we'll have a question by Ms. Harrington.
So just to clarify, so I understand this, there are minimum standards about responses and who must respond, and if this were to change, then every county would go back to deciding that for themselves? Is that right? No.
Not exactly. The experience that they had in San Joaquin County and Tracy, I feel it's, for my understanding of it, was best to frame it through that example. Their county emergency medical services agency developed a plan with a different set of criteria for response. So it was something that the city of Tracy didn't have any input on. So at the county level in an administrator's office somewhere, they determined this was the appropriate level of response. They cut out fire first responders to a number of different levels of classifications of emergencies, and they just sent ambulances. So it took away the right of the city of Tracy and other communities within San Joaquin County to determine what that level of response was.
But in Sonoma City, who determines it?
We do.
Oh, okay. So
yeah.
I'm just reading the thing here, sorry.
Yeah,
I know it's
I'm
not
sorry
a
if I
topic I'm
misunderstood
familiar
that.
with. Okay,
We
so
did-
we
we
already
decided-
have the ability to determine for our city what our level of response will be.
We absolutely do, and we want to maintain that.
Okay, we want to maintain, okay, so we don't want what happened there to spread to here.
No.
Okay, got it, okay.
And again, that was one of the fears that we had with the EMS ordinance that was in the works, was that it might give that ability to our local EMS agency to dictate to any of the local communities, this is the level of response that you are going to have.
I see. Oh, and then the second thing is that you want additional local control so that we could pass our own ordinance, which would prohibit non-government competitors.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Thank
So I believe that within this framework of local control and broadening a local jurisdiction's ability to determine response levels and service levels, I believe that goes hand in hand with those exclusive operating areas that would allow us to not be mostly assured that we're going to continue to get that revenue and provide that level of service, but it would be an absolute security that we're able to continue to fund the level of service that we currently have.
Thanks, very
You bet.
helpful.
You bet.
Mr. Vice Mayor.
So my grandfather was a fire captain in the city of Santa Ana in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And when we were little kids, he'd always say, who do you call if you have a problem? And it was always the fire department. And he says, you don't want an ambulance showing up at your house. You want the fire department there. Back in those days, I don't think they were EMTs, but they had X knowledge and so on. So this is something I fully support, and I get the revenue issue. I think it's something with our aged population here and the kind of calls that the department is on a regular basis, and that revenue opportunity, I would hate to shift that to a private operator that might not have the same skill set and the knowledge of the folks that are our repeat customers. So, thank you.
Mr. Cook.
I will also be supporting this with Vice Mayor Edwards. I always believe in local control, and I do believe jurisdictions have the right to kind of know. It's not, some things aren't a template. I used to be a volunteer fireman, and I can tell you when I heard Chief Ubaldi on the radio telling us to go in or not to go in, it was nice coming from him, not somebody from somewhere else that I didn't know.
Well, I wanted to ask a question. Are some, the act in 1980, I guess, are some of these the provisions, are they antiquated? It said something about 57 and 80. So are these moving along? Because obviously the role of firefighters is far different than it was even 20, 25 years ago. It's just a whole different profession.
Yes, I think the historical background kind of speaks to there's been a very contentious relationship for a long period of time between EMS agencies, the state EMS agency, and even some of the local EMS agencies and the fire service. And some of the provisions in the Health and Safety Code allow us to, with the public's investment of dollars, to provide EMS services, and that's what we're banking on. That's what our lawsuit was in '93, and that's the basis for us wanting to continue to provide that service and have those exclusive operating areas. I think we've been caught up because of litigation and that poor working relationship of being able to actually have legislation that is current, that addresses what we currently do and what we think is in the best interest of the public.
Because I think the requirement is more than EMT, it's actually paramedic, is that right? The steps?
Absolutely, yeah.
Thanks.
Did you have anything to add on that?
The only thing I'll add is, and I was here and worked on the case when we litigated it in the 90s, so I'm intimately familiar with the issues that came forward in that piece of litigation. Unfortunately, what happened subsequent to that piece of litigation, which established the city's rights to continue to provide the level of service that we were providing at the time that the statute changed, there have been subsequent pieces of litigation in other counties that have, I guess, led the Sonoma County EMS agency to believe that were the case relitigated today, there might be a different outcome. And so they've pushed at the envelope a little bit in terms of both the proposed ordinance that they had originally been offering, that the chief, I think, spoke to. And they have really pushed at it in terms of us doing a pushback about retaining local control within the city of Sonoma and exercising our rights that were granted both by the legislation, in our opinion, originally, and by the courts. I do believe that a clarification in the legislation that establishes those rights legislatively makes them stronger is a good thing. It's a, for lack of a better word, a legislative pushback that reduces the chances for ongoing and continued litigation, not just in other places where they haven't already litigated it, but also here. And I also think that we need to remember that the residents in this community made a very large investment in emergency services, and they continue to pay for that investment on an annual basis. And part of the theory behind that is that the citizens here taxed themselves because they cared about the level of service that they were actually being provided, and they wanted it provided at a local level. And they wanted the decision-making and the response decisions to be made at a local level. And I think that doing anything that we can to protect that is essentially protecting what the citizens thought they were buying when they signed up to pay for it.
And I will also be supporting this resolution. So at this time, I believe we are going to go out to the public for public comment on these resolutions. Seeing none, I will bring it back for final discussion, and I'm imagining this will probably be 2 actions. So we'll start with resolution number 1. If someone has a motion they'd like to give. Mr. Cook?
I'd like to go ahead and make a motion to approve a resolution of the League of California Cities calling upon the governor and legislature to enter into discussion with League and other public safety stakeholders to identify and implement strategies to reduce the unintended negative impacts of existing criminal law.
I'll second.
Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Harrington?
No.
Councilmember Agramonte? Mayor Pro Tem Edwards?
Yes.
Mayor Henley?
No.
Thank you.
And resolution number 2, if someone has a motion.
I move that we to support the resolution calling for the governor and legislature to work with the league and other stakeholders to amend Government Code Section 3861, clarifying the definition of local control, providing broad statutory authority for local officials to determine emergency service levels and direct emergency medical responses within their jurisdictions.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a first, we have a second. Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Harrington?
Aye.
Councilmember Agramonte?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Edwards?
Yes.
And Mayor Henley?
Aye.
Thank you.
And thank you to our chiefs, Chief Baker, Chief Sackett, for taking the time to educate us about these things. Moving on to item 7.2. Discussion, consideration, and possible action to approve a selection process for Sonoma Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency Advisory Committee appointee to act on behalf of the City of Sonoma. We will begin with our Public Works Director.
Greetings, Mayor Henley, members of the council. As you know, the Sonoma Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency, also the GSA, has been formed. It's governed and administered by a board of directors. Councilmember Cook is the City of Sonoma's primary director, and Councilmember Agramonte is the alternate. And in addition to the governing board of the GSA, there's an advisory committee board. Will provide input and recommendations to the board on the groundwater sustainability plan development, implementation, and policies. And the intent of the advisory committee is to provide a community perspective and participation in the Sonoma Valley GSA. And recently the board appointed the board appointed 6 members to the advisory committee, and those names were provided in your packet. The city's been requested to appoint a member of the advisory committee to act on behalf of the city. And this item is before the council to request direction from the council on how to proceed with the selection of the city's appointee, including whether the appointee should live or work within the city limits or within the Sonoma Valley groundwater basin. So the recommendation from staff is that the city council approve a selection process where Sonoma Valley GSA Board of Directors member, Council Member Cook, reviews the applicants for the GSA Advisory Committee with Mayor Hunley, and then makes a recommendation to the City Council. And it's also recommended by staff that the City Council require that the appointee live or work within the city limits. And pending council direction tonight, staff would propose to post an invitation and application form tomorrow, September 7th, with applications due 2 weeks later on September 21st. That would allow September 22nd through 26th, more or less, for application review and selection of a recommended appointee. September 28th, we would need a complete council packet for council to make the appointment on October 2nd. The first meeting of the GSA Advisory Committee will be in early October. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and Councilmember Cook may also have comments on this item.
And maybe just, if I could add one other item, just to remind members of the public that are watching, we're bringing this item forward now ahead of your broader conversation about commissions, because this appointment needs to be made by early October. So we're really kind of taking what has been historical practice about the mayor marrying it directly with a GSA board director as a board member as a process. But that's why this one is being pulled forward.
I have one question about the residency or work location requirement. Who would be the person that verifies it? And would it be that they would have to maintain a residency or work outside the city? And would somebody be paying attention to this?
Typically, the verification of that would be with the clerk. And as far as the maintaining of the residency, they would be required to maintain that to be eligible to serve.
And if for some reason something changed, then the seat would be vacated, and then we would just have to do it again? Correct. Okay. Do you have any other questions at this time? Seeing none, I will take it out to the public for public comment. Seeing no comments, I will bring it back to the council for discussion and action. Mr. Cook.
Yeah, I'd like to start off by saying thank you to my colleagues on the council for allowing me to be on the GSA. I think it's one of the most important things that's going to happen in Sonoma County for years, and the effects will actually be on that. With that said, I do believe that the language should be that they should have to be a resident of Sonoma. I believe that because I know the other colleagues that I have on the GSA board and how they've picked them. We do need to have a voice of Sonoma. And how I would plain say it is that if you could run for city council, you could be on this. So all those criteria would be the same. As far as the appointing process, I do believe that Mayor Hunley and myself, because of the Brown Act rules, would have to be me and the mayor would be good to get this, because one thing that we are a little late to the game, and it's more or less something that I would like to do really quickly and pass that. So that's my recommendations to my colleagues on the council.
Ms. Harrington? Any further discussion at this time? Let's make a motion.
I make a motion that we approve a selection process where Sonoma Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency Board of Directors member, whoever it is at that time, review the applications of the SVGSA Advisory Committee with the then serving mayor, and then make a recommendation to the city council for who the appointed person will be to the advisory committee. That person, the requirement be that person live within the city limits and be a qualified elector. I think that's the term.
I'll second.
All right, any final comments? Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Harrington?
Aye.
Councilmember Agramonte?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Edwards? Mayor Hunley?
Aye.
Thank you.
All right. Item 7.3, consideration, discussion, and possible action to finalize appointment process and related items for both Valley/Regional Commissions and Committees, Group A, and City Commissions and Committees, Group B. We will begin with our city manager.
Good evening, Mayor Hunley and Council. So I'm going to give a little bit of context and background, and then really this is going to be kind of a team approach as we work with the council on getting final direction with our Assistant City Attorney, Veronica Nebb, and our City Clerk, Rebecca Barr. So before we dive into the details, there are two agenda items we're going to talk about commissions tonight. The first one is really looking to try to get final direction on which way council wants to go to craft administrative policies. The second staff report that we'll come to next is basically we've gone through the municipal code, and there are some changes that have to be done in the municipal code in order for the council to create new administrative policies. So we basically have to repeal portions of the Muni Code. That whole process, as council knows, whether we're creating an ordinance or repealing an ordinance, is about a 60-day process. So if you want to be ready to, the goal that the council directed staff to do was be prepared. You wanted to be ready to appoint a revised planning commission by early November, so that revised planning commission, to be determined composition, that body would be prepared to start work on the West Napa Hotel EIR, which will be coming late November, December type timeline. So because of that, we really need to, these two items they come in sequence, but they are kind of connected. So I wanted to outline that for you, but that is the broader kind of roadmap that we're headed on. So with that context, I want to talk a little bit about coming back to agenda item 7.3, which really is focused on looking at a variety of policy issues to gain final direction. And in terms of the item before you, what we have and what we've done since the last direction we got from council was July 31st. And we took a variety of kind of straw polls to get a pulse of what you thought on different items. What we didn't do, because it was late, and was step back and how do all those pieces go together? And when you step back, and the thing about looking at the commission appointment process, and there are macro decisions and macro policy decisions, and then the whole variety of micro policy decisions. And so working with legal, we tried to write an administrative policy for you based on the direction, but there really are a variety of different roads and tweaks, and so we really felt like we needed to come back, and we have put together for you this document, which is kind of an executive summary, laying out the direction we got from council. And then as we really were trying to write the administrative policies, there were a few things that, as you look at those kind of straw polling we did at the end of July, there are some things as we looked at it that they don't work as well when you really kind of start to drill through options and scenarios. And so we wanted to be able to represent and communicate some of that to you. And then again, because these pieces all go together in a 3D puzzle, we needed to step back and look at it as a 3D. So what we'd like to do tonight is kind of walk through that executive summary. We also provided you information about really what the other agencies do in Sonoma County, because we thought that was some context. And I think in general, we do have a few places where staff is providing some alternative recommendations. There are a few things we didn't talk about either. As we started to write the administrative policies, we didn't talk about removal at all. And there's a variety of options in terms of if you have a commissioner that needs to be removed for a reason, what is that? So there are some things we hadn't talked about at all that need to be looked at. So that, I think, what makes sense to do, and I apologize, it's hard for folks to read that may be watching it, but the staff report is available in the detail. There are as we looked at the executive summary, council does have an updated version, a paper version that is in front of you, and we also, so you'll want to make sure you're looking at that. We do have some additional copies for members of the public that are in the audience, if you'd like to see that.
Just briefly, those copies are out in the lobby on the shelf of the agendas.
So if I may, Kathy, just add one more additional thing, because as we walk through this, we're going to try to make it not confusing. I'm not sure we'll succeed, but we're going to try. One of the things that I wanted to point out is that certain decisions that we make, or certain decisions that you make relative to these policy questions or operational questions, they are a little bit of a trickle-down theory, meaning one decision can affect something later on in the process. Try to point those out as we come upon them. Feel free, there are maybe some decisions you want to defer until we talk about later items and then come back to make those decisions. Or feel free to, if when we get to a later discussion on the table, if the council feels like, wait, we might want to change our mind about what we said earlier or rediscuss that in light of the effect that it has on the next item, feel free to come back. We will try to point those out, but there are certain things here that are, I would call them, if you were reading something like a dependent clause, if you make a certain decision above, it's going to affect a decision below. So with that,
I have a question. So are we gonna vote on each numbered item on this chart, or are you thinking that we're gonna discuss everything and then have an enormous vote on everything?
we were thinking we were going to vote on each item on the chart as we go along, because really what we're trying to do is make sure we have very clear direction when we go to finish drafting. We've actually drafted these policies based on your previous direction with some alternate clauses. That ended up being like an 18-page document. We would have had to slog through, and it would have made no sense to you.
That makes sense to me to go one by one. I was just checking.
Okay.
Yeah, and I do think that as Veronica said, when we come, I think we should be willing to revisit and then look at the entire thing as a whole and make sure you're comfortable. Okay. All right, so I think what we're going to do is kind of take some turns and walk through these pieces, and we're going to kind of just do some handoffs on different items. So the first thing is what the application process is. So we are, what we talked about before, and I think we're all in agreement that all applicants submit a written application. Staff has actually been working on a revised application that is already well underway. It's been reviewed by legal, and be happy to share a kind of a draft copy of with council to get copies on that. If you remember, there are kind of two groups that we've talked about. The group A, which are those regional valley appointments where really it's only one or two appointments that the council is making. And the conversation there was that those, that there we would continue to do interviews. The group B, which is really the city's commissions, where we've got 5 or 7 people sitting on a city commission. The conversation from the council last time was there would be no formal interviews by the council, but individual members could reach out. You could do your own conversations individually, but there would not be a formal interview process for city commissions. And so that is kind of generally what was laid out in terms of the application. Regardless whether council goes with individual appointments, whether we're talking at large, we're talking council as a whole votes, whatever the selection process you're going to get to, the gate that someone would need to go through is they would still need to put in an application, because we think that's an important part of transparency, that when these applications come forward to the council and to the community, any community member can look at an application, and regardless of what process you're going to use to select, those applications are available and visible for someone to understand who is Joe Smith and those written applications would be available. Okay. Any questions on that one? Okay.
So I believe we're going to talk about interviews next, but I noticed your last sentence under applications talking about interviews, but maybe I'll save it until we're talking about interviews.
Okay, so the next item then
I think we have
was.
one more question.
Oops.
So are we voting or not?
Yep, we should vote on that, thank you. So number one, and since these are kind of straw, do you want to do rank, Rebecca? Do you want to go through roll call? I think where there's consensus, we can do consensus, where there's not.
Yeas and A's, and then
Yeah.
if there's a no, we can
I
figure
think that
out
would be
what
great.
it is.
If we can't follow, we'll stop you and ask for a roll call if we've lost our way.
All right, so all in favor of the application process as described?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? None.
Okay, so the next one, the interview process for mayoral appointments, Group A. This, again, the list of the different committee appointments here. This is the Sonoma Valley Citizens Advisory Committee, Oversight Board, to the Successor Agency, Sonoma Community Housing Corporation, Library Commissioner, the Mosquito Control District, and the GSA Advisory you've just done. So the plan would be going forward that these would use the mayor process, where the mayor and that the mayor and one council member would interview the candidates.
Okay, any questions about this one? All in favor?
Before you move on, just one tiny point of clarification. When we're talking about the mayor and one council member to interview the candidates, the additional council member is chosen by the mayor under our scenario. Do you want to leave it that way, or are you at all interested in the additional council member being chosen by the council as a body?
Mr. Cook?
I personally would like to leave it to the mayor's choice.
Okay. I agree. Anyone else?
One thing as well that I was going to mention is it may be putting a statement in the policy that these are the committees that are identified at this point. But if we do have an additional committee, just like we had the GSA committee, that we don't have to come back and make a change to the policy, that can be added as long as it clearly fits into the regional valley committees. Or would you like that addressed to have it be brought back on each individual?
Well, I don't think a lot of these committees are being added. I think it wouldn't hurt to think about it as a group and add it to the list.
I agree with that. I think it should come back.
Take our vote.
So let's take the vote. So right now the vote would be, as it was written, and the mayor will choose the council member, and if there are additional committees to be included, we would bring those back in the future to determine what the selection process would be.
All right. All in favor? Aye. All opposed?
Okay, good news, making good progress. Thank you. All right. So the third one is the selection process for the mayoral appointments of Group A. And here, so a couple things. The way the staff report includes all the names of candidates who applied, including requests for reappointment, and links to those applications would be in the staff report. The mayor would nominate a proposed candidate, and the name of the nominee would be released in the agenda. The city council ratification of the mayor nominee is still required. The mayor would state his or her rationale for his or her appointment at the meeting, and if the council ratifies, the candidate is appointed. If the council does not ratify, the mayor chooses the secondary nominee and requests the council to ratify at the same meeting. So we're not coming back a week later. We're going to because all the information would be on the agenda, all the applications would be available, and we would move through it until hopefully we can get to an agreement and have an individual selected to fill the slot. So the only piece that we've changed here is to really say that the name of the nominee, originally we had talked about the name of the nominee not being disclosed. The more we talked about, and again, staff has talked about this in the last 3 or 4 days since the agenda went out, we really felt like if full council for you to make a decision because it has to be ratified, the name of the individual really needs to be announced and then I think the mayor, because if that person, the rest of the council needs to know who is that person, and they need to think about are they comfortable with ratifying that person, and then you also need to know who else is on the list. Because if the first person is not ratified, then you got to understand who the second is. And so I think research and homework that the full council needs to be able to do, and therefore we're changing that piece, and we're recommending that the mayor's nominee would be announced as part of the packet, but the full, anyone who is applying new or asking to be reappointed would be listed and available for a full council decision-making discussion.
So is that stated somewhere in here?
That's stated in the revised updated piece, and that's
The one on your screens and the one that was sitting at the dais. To be very specific, the original language that we had was communicated to the full council before the meeting. We decided that the manner of communication should be explicit, and the manner of communication would be when we prepare the packet and publish it. That's when the mayor's nominee is disclosed, and that's when the council gets all of the council, the remainder of the council members get the full information that the mayor has. It intends to nominate a specific person, and who the others are who would be eligible, having submitted applications, to also be chosen if there is a failure to ratify.
Right, any more questions on this one? So vote with the change regarding the name being released with the packet, right? Right. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Actually, we're going to take a 2-minute break because I want to take a break too.
Hey, we got through pretty fine.
Bringing it back, we were right in the middle of, what, 7.3?
Yes, so we're now going to move to item number 4, and Veronica will take the next 2.
Okay, so number 4 is just as stated. It's just essentially the council, the city clerk to provide all of the applications to the council 15 days ahead of the meeting, so you all have time to digest them, decide whether or not there's anybody you want to talk to. Since there is no formal interview process being suggested for the Group B selections, essentially each council member would reach out to whoever of the applicants they thought they wanted to reach out to get additional information. So we felt that you needed some time to be able to do that. Can answer any questions on that one if you have any.
Right. Any questions on this
The only other comment I would say, let's maybe add the words at a minimum of 15 days. It may be that we're able to get them to you even more ahead of time. I think the goal is you want at least a minimum of 15 days.
No less than.
Yeah, good, thank you.
Mr. Edwards?
There was a time when we hardly got any applications for commissions in this town, and we had to go out and beg people to join commissions.
But now civic participation is popular. Any more questions on this one? All in favor with the revision of no less than or minimum, something of that sort?
Yes.
Aye. Aye. All opposed? Nobody.
Okay, on number 5, before we sort of take up number 5, staff wanted to raise sort of an overall policy question with you. There are, as council's aware, a whole lot of these committees and commissions and a whole lot of members, and we wanted to sort of let you know that we've proposed this as a Group A and a Group B, and we've sort of grouped them all in one group or another. There is another option available to you, and that other option that's available to you is if you want to change the process for one or more commissions. For instance, if you wanted to change the process for Planning Commission and Design Review, or just Planning Commission, you could carve that one out and place the other ones back into another group, or provide a different process for those. And so we didn't want you to think that there was just 2 choices there, that they had to be in Group A or they had to be in Group B, or that all of these had to be in Group B because they were of a specific type. You do have the ability to, shall I say, pare that list down if you'd like to.
And I think that question probably makes more sense to come back to after we've gone through stuff and you've built some of the picture here, and then you can. But if you do want to chew that through, you're welcome to.
All right, so this section number 5 here, your recommendation is to come back to it after we talk about all the other little pieces?
Unless you want to talk about it now, yes, I think that would be helpful for the council. Again, you may say at the end, no, we don't need to come back to it at all. We know that we want to carve it out the way we had originally envisioned. Or you may say, wow, given that this process is so different and there are so many commissions affected, so many individual appointments affected, maybe we want to carve it up differently. It's council preference for this. We put the question here because it affects primarily Group B, so we wanted to make sure that we raised it so you could think about it as we move through the other questions. But we don't think it's mandatory that you make a decision now on this one, but if you want to make a decision now on this one so that you know what committees and commissions we're talking about when we talk about detail, if you have any interest in carving it up differently, you certainly could discuss that now.
Question or comment, Ms. Agramonte?
Comment, I actually feel very comfortable leaving Design Review, Community Service, Cultural, Traffic Committee the way that it's all, it's been. But the Planning Commission is the one that seems to be most contentious. That's the one that keeps coming back historically, regardless of who the mayor is. There's always been a discussion. So I'm only really interested in the Planning Commission appointment of being changed. Oh, sorry. I'm getting too relaxed. The Planning Commission appointment. That's just an opinion.
I would support talking about this piece at the end because I do think that we will have a lot to talk about, and it seems like it'd be easier to get through the clear stuff and come back to it, but if you guys want to talk about it now?
I'm just wondering if you're going to go through the rest of the entire item or you wanted to just talk about this part of the item.
Council preference. We could talk about the rest of item 5 and come back to it if you want. Talk about all of it and come back to it if you want. Either way.
I mean, my preference is that you give us the complete report on each item and then we discuss it. So I'd like to go through all of item 5 and then discuss it, or pass it, but just not do 1/3 of it.
Yeah, I vote for pass it and come back to it. I just think it could take a while.
Okay.
All right, come back. Number 6.
So the next item has to do with, as it was originally envisioned, each council member would be appointing one member, with the order of appointment choice being on a rotating order determined by a random draw. the at-large members, and I'm going to talk about these two items together, the at-large members then also being on a random draw. As we tried to start writing this up, and this was probably one of the key points that we struggled with as we tried to write this policy, we realized that there was the law of unintended consequences or potential unintended consequences had hit relative to the idea of the random draw, at least as respects the, I'll call them at-large committee members, the number exceeding 5, meaning you each have one appointment on a random rotating basis, who goes first, who goes second, who goes third, who goes fourth and fifth. With regard to then a 7-member committee with an alternate, there are 3 additional appointments to be made once you've each made your one. As we tried to figure out a way to craft a random draw and individual rotating appointments for those 3, we realized as we looked at what could be the possible outcomes of that those may be unintended consequences. So we want to speak to you about those and really understand and have you make an informed decision about which way you want to do this. Staff is essentially recommending that 2 things in this regard. One, that yes, the rotating individual appointments for the first 5, we'll call them the first 5 commission members, make sense to be on a rotating basis. Although for transition purposes, we're suggesting that we set a specific date that each term begins and then ends, tied to the council members' terms, but so that in fact we don't have 5 different dates, if you will, for appointment to each council. Administratively, that's very difficult for staff to have 5 different dates for the start of each committee seat or commission seats. We're trying to get a set date. That date's being suggested by staff as February 1st. With regard to the second issue, staff is recommending that the council as a whole vote on the at-large positions. Part of the reason for that is can be explained by some graphics that we will be prepared to put up in a second. But one of the things that happens is with regard to the issue of the rotating basis is that you have a situation where you could have more than a majority of a commission change as a result of an individual city council election. Because your own seats rotate 2 in one election and 3 seats in the next election, it's particularly exacerbated in the situation where you have 3 seats where either incumbent council members don't run or aren't reelected. So the individual appointees would be wiped out in those circumstances, meaning the commission appointment goes away with the council seat changing, if you will. And then you have a situation where if the individual appointments are also made to the remaining 2 seats plus the alternate, that those seats too then have a potential to be wiped out. So Rebecca, can you put up the sort of schematic that we tried to, we discovered that it's very, very difficult to understand this possibility without looking at a specific schematic. And council has this in front of you in paper format. But we essentially looked at it in a couple of different ways. Would we do 3 different draws to determine first who picks 1st through 5th for the 5 seats that have individual appointments, a second draw for the 2 remaining seats, who picks those, and then a 3rd draw for the alternate? Or would we do only 2 draws or all 1 draw? But as you can see from looking at this particular schematic, if we do 3 draws, which there's a reason that we thought 3 draws initially would be appropriate, you could have a situation where council member A receives 3 appointments to, and we'll use the Planning Commission as an example, the Planning Commission. Council member B, 2 appointments. Council members C through E, 1 appointment each. If you have a situation where council member, if that happens, and council member A and B are either don't run or are not re-elected, your Planning Commission at that point drops to 3 incumbent members. So you have only 3 of the 7-member committee that would continue on under those circumstances, and that includes the alternate. If you have a situation where that happens on an election cycle where 3 council seats are up, and all 3 people are either not reelected or don't run, that commission has the possibility to now drop to 2 members who are incumbents on that particular commission. The other problem that we noted is if you have a situation where somebody ends up with 3 appointments because of the rotating draw, we could envision a situation, not with all of you, but a situation where you had a 4-1 council, and because of the luck of the draw, the person who did not represent the majority of the council was the person who was picked to have 3 appointments. And so you could have a situation where the planning commission, or whichever commission we're talking about, was really out of sync with the majority of the council, because the minority of the council had the majority pick on the planning commission. Again, I'm using the planning commission as an example. Before I move on to because this is really tough, and even graphing it, I understand it's difficult. I'm going to ask for questions. Do you have questions about this specific scenario? Because I think probably you do. And before I move on to the 2 draw scenario, I wanted to talk about this.
Well, just as a comment, I'm fine with the entire council picking the alternates, or, you know, the other at-large positions. But are you saying that the term of the person does not extend to the reappointment date of February 1? How would there be a vacancy?
It isn't so much as it could be a vacancy because the person may not stay when their council member is no longer there. So they may actually leave. But yes, we are suggesting that the person remains in office until their successor is appointed. But really what this is illustrating is you only have 2 or 3 potentially incumbents who are left on the commission. So let's say, for instance, you have a particularly contentious project. We can use the now no longer before us First Street East project as an example, and we're in the middle of it. And you now have only 2 or 3 commission members who continue on after an election because you have new appointments or potentially new appointments by new council members. So I think that's why I said maybe the law of unintended consequences of rotating the additional 3 positions, 2 and the incumbent, could be that you have fewer, or the potential for fewer experienced members to remain on the commission, or even fewer members that have experience with individual projects. And the Planning Commission and Design Review, I think, probably illustrate this the most.
So it seems like taking a step back, because this is all making it sound extremely complicated. Like, are we going to talk about whether are we just going to stick to 5 seats plus an alternate? Instead of, I think the question here is what to do with the 2 at-large seats, and that's the graph about how it's not really egalitarian. So I don't see a box in here about, you know, the fundamental question of, you know, do we want to stick with 5 plus 2 plus 1, or we just want to do 5 plus 1? So I feel like maybe we should just decide if we still want to have 5 plus 2 plus 1, or if we want to, in light of this, maybe pick something simpler.
So you're correct. We didn't provide options where you'd made really what we thought were really clear decisions, or where we didn't think that was necessarily an unintended consequence. But you're right. You could go back to the basic question of, do you want to do 5 and, I'll call it 5 and 3, or do you want to do something else even for the 5? If you want to go back over that ground again, certainly we're happy to do that with you. But we thought that your direction on that was fairly clear at the last meeting.
Mr. Cook?
I think we might be overthinking it with this graph, because in reality, if you look at a planning commission, if this scenario happened, which you know, it possibly could happen, and I understand staff's concern and should bring it to our attention, but I believe as a council member, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think that you know, council members coming up that are elected will be looking at that body because they're experienced. So not that I really support this, but I wouldn't use that argument against it, because in my mind, I want it simple. simplify. This seems like one of the most simple ways to go. But this scenario here does not bother me, because I think that there's other things that we haven't looked at as far as council members looking for experienced individuals that have served that post.
Sorry. Okay, that's fine.
Well, if the council would, I just don't know if there is an interest, because last time it was a 4-1 vote for this one, so that's why I wanted to bring it up again in light of this complexity. But would people want to reopen the discussion of the numbers and make it all just 5+1, or stick with these two sort of other seats on there?
So the question is, do we want to eliminate the at-large seats? Is that the question?
Yeah, but they're not really at large in this scenario. It's more just like a double seat. Like traditionally, I thought they were going to actually be an at-large seat, where like the council as a whole would somehow have some sort of ranking vote system. Like this, especially with this like multiple round drawing system, it's really just sort of this like lottery all the way, and they're not at large at all.
Right, and I think that's probably why the staff feeds into the reason why staff is making a recommendation that they really do be at large, and the council as a body select those additional 2 plus the alternate member.
So if we could maybe go to slide 3.
Yeah, so
if
what
you
is
could pull
the
slide 3.
suggestion?
So here's the suggestion that's, from slide 3 is, again, you have council members. For the first 5, council members make an individual appointee that are tied to your term. And then for your at-large positions, 6 and 7, and the alternate, the council is making those votes as a council as a whole. Remember, the way this is going to work going forward is you will have anyone who's interested who wants to be, if their term is up, who wants to be reappointed, anyone new will be on one list, and you'll be able to know who is currently sitting on your commission. And then you'll be making appointments, and you're able to kind of look at them because it's happening at one time a year versus scattered across. You're able to look at this as a unit.
So you would have all of the names when it came forward for the council as a whole appointment for the 2 additional seats plus the alternate. You'd know who each additional council member had chosen for their individual picks, and you'd know who the remaining pool was for the council as a whole appointments. Someone would make a motion, someone would either second it or it wouldn't receive a second, and you'd keep going through until the council as a body had chosen the second, the 2, well, I'm calling them at-large seats, the 2 at-large seats and the alternate.
Oh, this proposal is fine for me. The selection process is fine, and I would support it.
I would do. I think it's a lot more simple than this illustration, which I think illustrated the limitations of that. So, as far as how this matches up into our chart, because we were looking at the alternate section, but I don't see
it. Yeah, it's all part. These are all pieces of 5.
That's why I was so confused. All right, so we are going to do our straw vote on adopting slide 3, correct? Which
Yes,
is
yeah,
the-
that essentially is correct, yes. To make that an easy question, that's exactly what you're doing.
This slide 3. Yeah, please.
There's no page number, but 6 alternates. What does alternate positions have to be filled by a qualified voter? That's not voter, but somebody's going to be voting.
Oh, I wondered that too. Why is it changed from qualified elector to resident voter?
I asked, so I felt like the term qualified elector, while that is a term that we will use legally in the language, for the purposes of communicating with the public, I think that term is confusing. So what we really were saying is you have to be a resident and you have to be a voter. That's what qualified elector means. So we will use the term qualified elector.
Why do you have to be a voter?
That is what the term qualified elector means, which is what is currently outlined in the Muni Code. And so I wanted to make sure that when we're talking about qualified elector, what we mean is it's a resident and you have to be a voter.
If I may add, the reason that the alternate has to be a qualified elector is because in order, some seats are required, 5 or 6 of the seats on the planning commission are required to be qualified electors. As the alternate process stands now, the alternate automatically ascends to that seat. So in order to ascend, they have to be a qualified elector.
I can only imagine that actually means that you're eligible to vote, eligible to register to vote, not that you are a voter. That you have the qualifications to be a voter, not that you are actually a voter. It can't possibly be that you're a registered voter.
It actually has been the practice and the understanding.
I'm going to have to look that word up. I can't imagine that that's what it means. Go ahead. I'm going to work on this.
So as a part of anything future coming up, if the council was interested in keeping an option for an out-of-city seat on a commission that's for 5, having one of the at-large seats being out-of-city optional, I don't know if people are interested in that, but I think other people are.
We're going to come to one of the subsequent. It's a subsequent question.
So we're not going to skip ahead. So at this point, we still need to do our straw poll on 5. Yes.
Wow.
Second half regarding slide 3. Any further questions?
A qualified elector is any person who is 18 years of age, a United States citizen, and who has resided in this state and in the county for at least 30 days next preceding the election at which he desires to vote and who is registered as required by law. That's a qualified elector. All right. We learned something. Thank you.
Right. We've all learned that. All in favor of slide 3? Aye. Aye. All opposed? Great. None. Okay. We'll get there.
So the only other thing that was part of item number 5, I'm not sure you have to necessarily vote on, but when you're selecting your 5 people, we are proposing that we do a random draw as to who selects first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. Now, that seems like it may be a silly question, and maybe it doesn't matter, but you may each have a situation where you each wanted to appoint the same person. And so if it's not random, then it's sort of who jumps in first gets that one, and then the other person is sort of left figuring out, oh, well, now who do I appoint? So we are suggesting a random draw to determine just the order of how you make your formal appointment when you make your formal appointment. I'm assuming you're all okay with that, but if you're not.
So in practical terms, how do we find out if we've overlapped with somebody? It's just that when everyone puts their name in, and if there's 2 that are the same, whoever is the lower rank has to pick someone else?
Right.
Oh, okay. Seems fine. Mr. Cook?
I guess the question is, when does the council member say that person? At the meeting, or is this part of the agenda packet?
Our vision was that it would be part of the agenda packet, so you'd all say who your individual appointment was intended to be, letting staff know who your individual appointment was intended to be, and that it would be reflected in the agenda packet in the same way that we've discussed with the Category A appointments.
So with the Brown Act, it makes sense to have.
And it's also giving you the option. So envision this one for a minute. You've decided you're going to do council as a whole for the other 3 appointments. If you don't know before the day of the meeting or the night of the meeting who the individual appointments are, you don't know whether you need to go talk to. Now you know who you're left with. Say you have 5 additional people on this list to fill 3 seats. But some of you may not know all 5 of those people, or may want to ask some questions of those people. Pick up the phone and call them for your council as a whole appointments. And you won't know whether that's necessary until if you don't publish it with the agenda, you wouldn't know whether it was going to be necessary. You also wouldn't necessarily know whether it would be necessary if 2 of you have selected the same person. Oh, now I have to think about somebody else because I might be drawn second. So I think it's important that you have at least that 72-hour opportunity to know who your fellow council members are intending to select for their appointments, because it may affect your both vote on the additional appointments or your need to pick a choice 2, if you will.
And I think the other thing we're trying to avoid is where we end up having a Brown Act violation with a member of the public, where Gary's gone up to Joe Smith and I want to choose Joe Smith, and Joe says, Gary, I can't pick you. Amy's already picked me. And Rachel walks up and says, Joe Smith, I want to pick you. And he says, I can't. We've just created a Brown Act violation. If you guys have your list of here's who I want to appoint, 1, 2, 3, and then before we're putting the packet out, we are doing a random draw, and Gary, you're number 1. Who's your pick? And it's Joe Smith. Amy, you then tell me, and I just say that, Joe Smith is taken. Who's your second? Because you're the number 2. That's the way this process. So the goal was how to make it so you have information of who your peers are selecting prior to the meeting, and yet we're not setting up something that could occur, a Brown Act violation with a member of the public.
So then the member of the public is not supposed to tell anyone that you picked them.
Correct.
Well, they can tell anybody they want once the packet comes out, but the packet comes out. Yeah.
All right, well, I think we've gotten through that. So are we good to go on to number 6?
So you were okay with that? That
was
concept
cool
of
with
the order of the random
Yes.
draw order. Okay. We're not quite to 6 yet. We have one other thing under 5, and that has to do with you had not envisioned any kind of a ratification process. So right now under the mayoral appointments, you have the mayor makes I'll call it a nomination for lack of a better word. It's really an appointment with ratification by the council. That we envisioned initially would go away with this individual appointment process to the first 5 seats. We had some staff discussion about whether or not that presented, again, a potential unintended consequence, an appointment that perhaps the individual in question had filed litigation against the city, was known to have been a particular problem in a previous appointment, et cetera, and whether or not we wanted to have a ratification process. Staff essentially is proposing one or the other, either a ratification process or a clear process for removal of individual commission members who prove to be an issue. So
there's a removal process listed as number 11.
it is. It's the last one on the entirety of this list. So we can come back to this if you want. I just wanted.
Say, let's get it over with. I'd rather do removal process.
I would as well, and it should be noted that no other council listed on the list of councils that have this format have ratification by the council as a whole. According to staff,
Ron or Bart does.
Well, that's what I was told today.
A little chart on. I think they put it on the consent calendar. Everyone else does not have ratification.
So I think definitely the removal process is better, and it defeats the whole purpose of having individual appointments to go back to the council ratification.
And just as far as Roanoke Park is, I was told that this is something that they're actually looking at changing.
Oh, having the ratification?
Or
changing it to ratify?
To not having a ratification even on the council.
Got it. How about everybody else? Ratification or removal? Your opinion's always vague, Gary. All right. Have we checked?
Okay, great.
Checked off almost all the boxes for 5 except the first one.
We did. Excellent. You want me to keep going, or you want to take the alternates process? Okay. So we're on to number 6. So 6, as we had originally envisioned it, has one alternate for each of the Group B positions. Alternates have to be filled by we're going to go back to the actual policy will say qualified elector, but resident voter of the city, and we'll talk about that one in a minute. Alternates will attend meetings, substitute during temporary or permanent absence of the regular member with full voting powers. Time served as an alternate doesn't count towards the term limits. Alternates automatically fill the vacant at-large position. Now, staff's recommended, I'll call it tweak to this, is that the alternate automatically fills any seat temporarily until the appointing council member makes a new appointment. Now, I have to say part of the reason we're recommending this is when we started to draft this, it became very quirky where you had commissions that allowed you, or in some instances compelled you, and we'll come back to that later, to have a resident qualified elector or non-qualified elector as one or more of the appointments, because the alternate in each instance has to be a qualified elector, which means that if you were compelled to have someone who was, say, just a Valley resident on the board, and the alternate is a qualified elector, they can neither temporarily nor permanently ascend to the position of voting member, for lack of a better word, because they don't qualify for that particular seat. You can't have the alternate be anything. They would have to fit in one category or the other, and historically you've had it that they are compelled to be a qualified elector. So that became a bit of a quirky situation. We felt like, well, you could temporarily have them fill the seat and then bump them back down and make that temporary appointment essentially be an exception. And frankly, to be honest, I'm not sure anybody's been tracking this. So if you have a situation where, let's say, a commission member has a conflict of interest, so they're not voting on a particular item, and therefore the alternate steps up, I'm not sure historically we've been tracking whether that alternate is replacing a Valley resident or a qualified elector seat. And so I think it's kind of quirky. And so we felt that having it just be a temporary, and if you want to then appoint that person to the empty seat, whichever empty seat that is, either the at-large position or an individual appointment, so be it. But with individual appointments, having the person automatically ascend to the seat seemed really quirky. So we're suggesting those be temporary ascensions, for lack of a better word, until an appointment is made.
Right. Any questions?
So the qualified registered voter has to live in the city?
Yes.
Oh, that's what we're really saying.
To be an alternate.
To be an
So the
alternate.
alternate has to be in city.
And that is the current process now with
That
the
is
code. So.
current. And then the other, I guess, suggestion is that it's kind of like a temporary alternate, but then someone could always like take the alternate, make them theirs, right?
Someone could take the alternate and make them theirs. That
And
is
we'd have to
correct.
appoint a new alternate if we took the alternate.
And then then you'd be filling the alternate position.
Right. Sarahton?
I'm fine with this, with the staff recommendation.
Any more questions, or we'll do a little vote? All in favor of the staff recommendations as laid
Aye.
out? Aye. All opposed? No. Great.
So we would like to clarify the process that alternate, regardless of whether they are a qualified elector or a non-qualified elector, can fill any seat, qualified elector or non, meaning you may have somebody who's a Valley resident. Now, this is going to come up later when we talk about the ordinance, so I want to be clear there's a trickle-down effect here. But right now, your ordinance is sort of all over the place as to whether or not seats are either available permissively to be a Valley resident, as an example, or whether it's mandatory that a Valley resident be on. Now, having it be mandatory creates a real quirky thing with regard to having an alternate who is not a Valley resident, because then the alternate is precluded from ascending because they're not qualified for that specific seat. And so it sort of somewhat defeats the alternate process to have a situation where your alternate has to be a qualified elector, but you have seats that are mandatorily not qualified elector seats. So we are later going to be suggesting that is permissive, that they may be additional seats that are not resident voters or qualified electors, but that it's not required that they be, because when you're creating then two classes of seats, you have a problem where your alternate only meets one class.
Okay, so So are we making that decision now, or we're going to come to it?
Well, we can come back to that one, but unfortunately, that one is actually in the ordinance, so we will have passed the policy before we come back to it. So if you can make the decision now if you want to, or we can come back to it and just assume that we're going to have it track whatever you do with the ordinance later on.
So this is, if we have seats that are open to the valley, it is not mandatory, but whatever the other word you said.
Permissive.
Permissive.
The question that's come immediately before you, however, is can the alternate fill any? Should we make it so the alternate can fill any seat? That's the only question we're really asking you right now.
Permanently or temporarily?
You've already decided it would be temporarily. So can the alternate temporarily fill any seat?
Yes.
Any seat? Yes.
Okay.
The question is, when we pick somebody for the at-large positions, do we want to say that they have to be from the valley, or do we want to say they can be from anywhere, including the valley? That's what we're talking about. Either it's mandatory that they not be from Sonoma, or we can pick somebody who is not from Sonoma if we want.
Or someone from the city, if you like that.
Right.
I guess my question is, and maybe it's irrelevant, but how did this get, what is the history of an out-of-city alternate?
There isn't one. The alternate has always been required to be in city, but the problem is that you had positions that were on some commissions and committees that were essentially required to be non-resident seats, which meant the alternate who was required to be a resident could never ascend to that seat because they didn't meet the qualifications. If the qualification was you couldn't be a city voter and all alternates have to be city voters, there were some seats on commissions that the alternate couldn't be placed into.
I think it was like, basically it was creating a purposeful vehicle to get input from the valley on matters that would affect everybody. And so there was a seat that was the valley seat so that they could, because they're affected by what we do, that they would have a voice. I think that's the purpose of making it have to be somebody that's not from Sonoma. And the question is, then if they're out for whatever reason, can somebody whose seat is mandatory from Sonoma cover for them, since they don't fill that same role as representing the voice from outside of town?
Right. Correct.
All right. Do we need to take a vote for this one?
I think, yeah,
All right.
I think we need
So-
to at least a consensus vote on this one, if not an actual vote. So the question before you is, can the alternate fill any seat?
All right. All in favor? Aye. All opposed?
Great.
I'll let you take terms of office. Okay. So one of the major things as staff we talked about was, again, our current process. As we have a vacancy occur, then that term, and you appoint, could be April, could be March, could be November. Terms are scattered all over, which is administratively difficult for staff to look at, but also you never kind of are looking at kind of your council, your commissions as a whole. And so one of the big terms is aligning all those terms, and our general recommendation is to have them commence on February 1. When we have elections in November, the elections certified in December, we would have had a commission advertising process, so council will get a chance, new council will get a chance to look at those interested folks, and then in January you would be taking any vote, and those folks would come in and be seated February 1. What that does mean is that you could have a commissioner who was appointed by a prior council member who does not get reelected, but that person is going to continue to serve until January 31. In January, the new council member could be appointing someone new, and February 1, that person would then take over. So that's kind of the commencement and the transition that we're talking about. So just because, especially since we're talking about, where council members making individual appointments, you have a council member who might not get reelected, who might not decide to run for election, and that commission appointee is going to continue to serve until February 1, when the new council member makes that new appointment. That's what this is conveying.
Okay. Any questions for this one?
I do have questions. So what does this do with, when do we have people who are experienced? If we're appointing, if, someone decides not to run, how do we have that continuation of experience for projects.
Well, I think in practice, I've talked to people from all of the cities that have done this. In practice, if someone's new is elected, new to the seat, like the motivation is to pick someone who's competent. And so often there's a great person, they'll get picked up by someone else. So just because they lose their initial council person, they might get picked up by someone else. So I think the way it all shakes out, it's not like it's a clean slate every single time.
And again, here we're only talking about when the term starts and ends. We'll later talk about the question of how long is the term. Here we're only talking about when does it start and end. We're just trying to align it up so there's not 5 different start dates for 5 different commission appointments.
Thank
Mr. Edwards?
We could end up with projects that take 6 years, we could end up having 35 different planning commissioners. Just making a point.
Well, I mean, you could now because people could just quit the day after they're appointed anyway.
Well, just to that point, I think the point is that if the planning commission is acting wildly against the interest and direction of the town who we report to, and they throw out all of the city council, they will be expecting a new planning commission. And that is one of the reasons to do this method, is because if the town does not like those actions, that is a direct way that they can, let us know.
That's a good point. So as far as having a start date, February 1st.
Just to be noted, for this first round, those, the first round for the planning commission, they will have a different transitional term.
I'm sure that's like a different piece. I think this is, let's get through box 7 so we can move on. So all in favor of February 1st for future? Aye. Great.
Okay. So, term limits for a minute. You can tell that as we started talking about this started going back and forth and doing a lot of flip-flopping. So we understood the original council direction to be no term limits for Group B. There was a period of time where staff thought, well, term limits might make sense. I think at this point, we've collectively changed our minds about that and come to a point of saying, yes, we believe there should be no term limits as the council had originally envisioned. However, staff is suggesting that there would be actual terms, meaning 4-year terms to coincide with the council member who had appointed them, for lack of a better word, tenure. And that each term of the council member's term in office, they would need to reappoint their members, so that there was a chance for a, for lack of a better word, reset by the council member. And it wouldn't just be sort of this automatic extension because the council member were reelected. The council member will remake their appointment with each term of office. So that's the staff suggestion.
That same process for the positions that are voted on at large and by the full council and the alternate. Again, when those terms, so that's a 4-year term, those terms come up, you may have new people that are interested in applying, they're applying. You have the same person who is says, I want to be reappointed. And the council is looking at that every 4 years. And a lot of times you are reappointing. Sometimes you're also, it's an opportunity to bring new blood and look at the overall composition of your commission and put someone new on. So the reality is, part of the why we've kind of started to reframe this, if the council can look at the full commission, every 4 years, and if you're looking at reappointments and you're looking at anyone else who's interested, frankly, there's every 4 years you're doing a reset. Not a reset, but you're doing an evaluation. And so maybe you don't need formal term limits.
Sure, we get to see the pool of everyone available and pick whoever's the best person. So we're making a decision now for not having term limits. Right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? We have an opposition. But you could go back.
Okay, in a related matter, Council's original direction was to retain the 2-4-2 terms as is currently done for those Group B commissions. This was one that as we tried to write this up, we kept tripping over it. We couldn't figure out how it was actually going to work in practice. And one of the unfortunate outcomes we realized of retaining the 2-4-2 comes in the context of what happens when you rotate who's the 2-year and who's the 4-year appointment. And so we have a slide to illustrate that point. If in fact you had originally decided that the 4-year terms for this first go round, as we understood it, and then going back and listening to the tape, would be Amy's appointment and David's appointment. And so if you then assume that the 2-year terms are Gary's, Rachel's, and Madeline's, when you then rotate that for the next appointment, it means every seat's up in 2024. And maybe that's okay and maybe it isn't, but we thought that was a potential unintended consequence, or at least an unhighlighted consequence of retaining the 2-4-2 rotating term appointments. I think, again, administratively, it's difficult to follow who is the 2, who's the 4, and who's the 2. And that particularly becomes highly illustrated if you have a situation where you have an unintended vacancy on the council. So, for instance, if a council member doesn't fill out the whole of their 4-year term and you don't appoint, but instead you have that person elected with the other group, then we don't know who now holds the 2-year, the 4-year, or the 2-year appointment, because you're not elected by district, so we don't know who the new person which seat they're actually taking. And as we tried to write this, we just started to rip out our hair with trying to figure out how do we even write the 2-4-2 rotating position in light of the fact that we don't really know whose seat is whose if that happens. So we are actually suggesting straight up 4-year terms to coincide with the council appointments, and sort of get rid of the 2-4-2. We are also suggesting, because we're going to get to the question of removal later on, if somebody's not working out, you have that option for removal that really takes away that question. Now, you will have a couple of appointments, obviously, that aren't going to be potentially the full 4 years, because when we align them, at least the first time out of the box, when we align them with your terms, you don't have 4 years left on your terms necessarily. So the first set isn't going to really have 4-year terms, potentially, if you replace them upon reelection, or if you're not reelected, or don't run.
So I just wanted to add one other kind of nuance. We had talked, I know the council and a couple of members of the council like the 2-year terms, that kind of trial period. We heard from some members of the public about that as well. If you're with a scenario on your commissions where you have 5 individual votes and that those are directly tied, setting those aside, the 2 at large and the 1 alternate, if you wanted to do those for an initial 2-year term and then 4 years going forward, you could do something like that for the at-large and the alternate, if that was a desire, because we did talk about that quite some time. So that's the only other kind of nuance, if you wanted for the at-large to do a 2, but then you wouldn't do 2-4-2, you do 2-4-4-4. You really would be using that 2 kind of for that initial trial. That's just one other idea if there's interest there.
Good questions or comments about term lengths? I personally think it should just be 4 for everything, except for the initial year stuff.
4 is good for me.
I agree.
I always like 2.
Okay. Do we need a vote? Did that?
Well, no, I got it so far, but I didn't hear from Madeline. Yes, 4. Okay.
Okay.
I don't know that we need to talk about 10 at all, because we've kind of already talked about it. The commissioners serve until their successors are elected. assuming they're willing to continue to serve until their successors are elected.
Selected.
Selected, sorry, you're right, it is selected. Thank you for that correction. You are correct. Does anyone need to talk about that, or you all agree?
I think we're good.
Okay. All right. So now we're down to the new item that wasn't even talked about before, and that is the question of removal. Right now, current process is it is a 4/5 vote of the full council to remove a commissioner, but any council member can initiate the removal of a commissioner. Meaning any of you can ask to put it on the agenda, right? Regardless of how they got appointed. I want to agendize the removal of council member or commission member A. And assuming you got 2 people to concur to agendize it, you would get it on the agenda, but it would take a 4/5 vote of the council to actually undertake the action as the rule is currently written today. So with the individual appointments becomes this question of, do you want to retain that removal process, or do you want to go to a different type of removal process? And without getting into a lot of hyper detail about it, you could have a process where you retain that for the at-large positions, but the council member who appointed was the council member who removes. You could do that. So only Councilmember Harrington would have the ability to remove Councilmember Harrington's appointment. You could do only that council member who appointed could initiate the removal, but it still took a 4/5 vote to get him off. You could go to a simple majority vote to remove a commission member. I think those essentially are the universe of your choices. So we thought we'd put in front of you, keep the current process, change it to an individual removal process, or drop it to majority rules on the process.
Well, it seems like the other option would be if you wanted to keep the supermajority but not require a 2-step agendizing vote, a vote to a vote. Like skip straight to just putting it on there, a supermajority vote.
So if you're skipping straight to, you could do that. That's another option. I agree. Although then the question becomes, that becomes an exception to your agenda process. How do you get it on? And does that mean anybody could initiate with one singular council member could initiate the removal of a different council member's appointee?
I had it on. Anyhow, that's what.
Well, the only thing I am uncomfortable with about removal is that there's no criteria for removal, and I don't like the idea that if somebody voted in a way you didn't like, that you would remove them. And what are we talking about? What are they getting? I mean, there'd have to be some parameters, so it's not like willy-nilly. A real reason for removal?
I think that's why it's 4/5 right now, is that there aren't any criteria or reason, because as soon as you establish criteria or reason, then you establish a methodology for challenging the removal. I think, you're removed because you removed. I suspect, and I don't know, but I suspect that that's why it's 4/5. So, because
I think we've had 2 removals in the last 25 years that I remember, and one was for a conflict of interest, and the other one never really did get by that one happening, but I think it was 4/5.
Yeah.
And I think that makes sense.
Mr. Cook?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it would have to be a 4/5 on at-large, but individual council members would have the ability to remove theirs. So, I mean, if it was a 5-5 or 5-0 vote to remove, that would mean that council member wanted to remove his appointee or his or her appointee. And I think that would make it very simple.
Well, so I think the question is whether only I could initiate removing mine, or if someone else thinks that I've picked someone who has done something egregious, whether they can initiate it. I think that, because when we did the ratification or in lieu of removing, it's like, it was sort of having the council be a check just for extreme circumstances where something like crazy happened.
But if there was some sort of legal issue or something that happened and somebody knew something about, we're supposed to defend the Constitution, right, and uphold the laws of the state of California. I think any council member should have the opportunity to say, oh, by the way, your appointee is X, and be able to initiate that.
I agree.
And I agree with that.
So that would counsel for leaving it alone and leaving it as it currently is, which is any council member can initiate, and it takes a 4/5 vote. Now, the question that I think Councilmember Harrington raised was, I guess it was Mayor Henley raised the question of, should we be able to skip over the process and anybody can put it on the agenda?
And my only thought was having two, it's a very difficult conversation, obviously, and it's like dragging it out twice and having two meetings and just whoever it is just being raked through mud twice.
My experience is sometimes, depending on the situation, but I've also seen a commissioner pulled, and in that instance, that commissioner was egregiously rude, dismissive to staff, there was a whole and council members had talked to the individual, and the individual did not change their behavior. So it's that kind of example that I've seen in a prior agency. So sometimes there are first conversations that happen between the mayor or a council member and a commissioner, and if behavior doesn't change or there's something more egregious, then you're kind of playing this kind of this last card. The other thing we could do is just be clear. The other option is, maybe there's two council members that you're Brown acting with someone and you are putting it on the agenda. So it could be that if you're going to pull 4/5, there's probably two of you that feel strongly, and you probably are Brown acting on this issue. So it could be that two of you come forward, and then we're skipping the pre-process, and it's going to so two of you contact the manager and say, we've got, this we want to put up for removal of Commissioner X, and then that just gets scheduled and put on the agenda, and we're not doing two-step. So that might be an easier if there's a pair versus just a one member.
That's yet another option.
I would support that.
Okay.
Yes?
2, 3. All right. So what I think I heard majority concurrence, but I'm going to check back. I think I heard majority concurrence that any two council members can get removal on the agenda, and a 4/5 majority of the full council can remove any appointee.
Yes.
Yes. Comments? Questions?
No, I would, because I would vote no on that. I would think it would have to be a 5. It would have to be a 5-0 at the end to remove. So if the four colleagues wanted to remove the person who I appointed, I should have the right, at least, if I vote no, then they wouldn't be removed.
It would be like, what would be the point of removing if you can't remove if you wouldn't volunteer?
It's almost an automatic veto. Let me say this. I don't think you'd be in that situation with this council, but I've worked for a lot of cities over the course of my career, and in one of them that will remain nameless, we had a council member who, I'll just describe this individual as extremely rogue. Ultimately became ineligible due to certain behaviors. If you're in that situation, that council member was never going to, would have never concurred. We could have never gotten to a unanimous decision, because whatever the other four voted, that person would vote the opposite in every instance. That was just what happened. So you would never be able to have a situation where you could get to unanimity. I can't even say that word. It's very hard to do that. I think 4/5 is quite a hurdle as it is, and must really mean that there's a real, very legitimate reason to remove that person, or you won't get 4/5.
I think you have 4/5 agreeing with you right now.
4/5 agreeing to the 4/5. Okay.
Well, the reason I wanted the criteria for removal is actually on the same question, which is if you have 4 people that have one perspective and you have one council member who represents a segment of the city that has a different perspective and they make appointments in line with that perspective, that's a valid viewpoint that needs to be represented. So the other 4 people who have a different viewpoint could remove your picks. I think that was why I was wondering what the criteria were. It's kind of the 5-0 question, which is what if you just have a different perspective, which is not inappropriate or some kind of outlier. It's just a different perspective than the 4 other people that are elected at the same time. And if it did get heated, people were sort of doing like a little, gamesmanship, then they could remove all your picks.
Right, and, or on the flip side, when we were talking about ratification, I'll continually refuse to ratify your pick. I think that is a possibility, although I think that, and we brought that up in the staff discussion, and I think Kathy's point at that point was, well, yeah, but that only works maybe once. And after it happens the second time and the third time, there's this sort of community backlash that happens that, oh, well, like the democratic process takes care of that problem. We've had the 4/5 removal requirement in all of our, and I think as Councilmember Edwards pointed out, on all of our commissions for as long as certainly I remember, and it's been used twice. So I think in this community it's very, very unlikely for it to be abused, and certainly the council can, revisit it if you feel it's not working. But
Mr. Cook?
Yeah, and I disagree, because I've seen councils, I've seen the 4-1, not to name any past council members. To initiate removal, I can understand that 2 members of the council could do it. At that point, due to the Brown Act, let's say that I appointed somebody to the design review. I'm not aware of what has happened, so now they brought that to my attention. It's come to light in this body, and then we discuss it. But I was elected to serve my constituents. The other 4 might be different, what Councilmember Harrington. So I think that we might be overthinking this, and sometimes, and this happens in my company all the time, we try to protect everything for that 0.5%, but we end up creating a problem on the other end. I would say that if I appointed someone to the Planning Commission as a council member, only I would be the one that would be able to remove that individual. And if I don't, and there's a public outcry, when I run for re-election or go to Safeway to go shopping, they're going to let me know. And that's democracy. What we're doing here, I think, would be going a little bit where I would not support that.
Okay. So that.
Okay, the only thing I can add is that I'm good with the 4/5 because 4/5 because I've never been part of a body that was so clandestine. It just, in my experience, doesn't happen. And if it does, there's always a way to get back. You don't, well, that's all I'll say.
All right. So do we need to take a vote, or you got your data?
I think we got our data.
And so now we just have to go back to 5, Part A. And so this question is, which commissions is this going to apply to? And I'm going to, well, Cultural and Fine Arts, are we keeping this in there, or is there going to be a possibility of, because at one point we had thought maybe some sort of coalition and not a Brown Act Commission?
I mean, the Cultural and Fine Arts Commission, I think, they may still want to have conversations about scope and roles, and maybe as we look at some best practices working with our commissions going forward. So, the Cultural and Fine Arts Commission, since we have not had an active kind of public art program in the last few years, a lot of what they're doing is events and activities that it's difficult to do when you're a Brown Act committee. But I think they're definitely doing, they're doing good work. I think there's this whole creative alliance that's kind of starting to grow, and, would we be better served to have a broader kind of coalition, not a city commission, working on arts pieces? I think that's a kind of a different conversation for a council to have on a different day, and maybe have with the commission itself. I do think there's a question, if you wanted to, like traffic safety and cultural fine arts, if you wanted to pull those off into the mayor process and maybe deal with CSCC, Design Review, and Planning Commission within Group B, that's another way to divide this up. Remember, your CFAC only has 5 members. I think your traffic safety only has, sorry.
CFAC has 7
Oh,
members
they do. I'm
plus an
sorry.
alternate. Yeah.
Okay, I was thinking it was only 5. My apologies. So, again, you can do the full group here. You can peel off just Planning Commission, which is where I run most of the conversation, or you could look at moving cultural fine arts and traffic safety over to your Group A, dealing with the mayoral, and look at Planning and Design Review and your CSCC under the Group B, which is your individual models and the at-large.
I would pick all 5, not pick on anyone's in particular.
I would pick all 5 as well.
That's good.
Yeah, I would pick all 5.
I'm sorry, could you? For the new process.
Yes.
Do you want to limit, oops, sorry. The question before you is, do you want to limit the new process to something less than the full 5 commissions? And that's the question.
And the alternative would be to keep the mayoral process for some, and then the individual appointments for others.
Well, I'm still in favor of just, although I will say, I think it would be great if possibly, the council could have more input on the direction of these commissions. Because sometimes I'll read and I'll go, geez, when did that happen? And so, I mean, that's sort of like something, possibly a behavior modification of some kind. But yeah, I'm in favor of that.
I just think it creates like a tie to the commissions, because there are some like traffic and safety, which, I mean, thank you for all the commissioners out there serving on it, but I just feel like there's a very like far distance between us, because we can't even remember who was the last person to appoint someone on there. Mr. Edward?
Sounds like I can count. So, I agree.
Okay.
All 5.
The decision was the majority is all 5.
Yes.
So maybe 2 other things. They're still going back out to public comment, and then I'd like you to look globally and say, as all the individual actions, if there's anything else you want, as we've gone through them, take a global vote that as you're comfortable. And I think just one other thing I want to mention, again, the plan on this would be, we'll be coming back, writing this up into administrative policy. And the new piece would really be kind of taking effect for all the rest of the ones of February 1. So that would be kind of the new start. So you'd be kind of looking at everything in that February 1 timeframe, other than the Planning Commission, which we're front loading to a November timeframe.
So can I just make one last comment? I hate to sound like a fishwife. That's what my husband said, because I complain about things. I would like to reiterate the fact that we need to train these people. There needs to be a process for ethics training. There needs to be a process to train them on how to run a meeting. I sat here at one meeting. I was astounded. And I think in addition, which I left them out of the loop, but I think, Kathy, you have also suggested that staff be trained with that same purpose in mind, because, I won't say anything about that, but I just think that we're on the same page with that. And also planning commissioners. I think that needs to start as soon as possible. I don't know what the semester is, but I really believe it would be, get that part of it going, because they represent the people we represent, and I think it's important.
Yeah, my last comment, just because public's watching, this is good. I thank staff for going through this, and I just want everyone to know that it's not that the commissioners have done anything bad. It's a process that needed to be changed to make it more with up to date. I would like to see what Councilmember Agamonte said at the beginning of this whole process. We do need to celebrate the community involvement that we have with these commissioners, and I don't want this meeting to seem like we're beating up on the commissioners because it's voluntary. City council members, at least we, there's certain benefits that we receive. These commissioners don't, and I'm hoping that this will make it a lot easier on them, because as using as a political tool, I don't believe that this is what this is all about. I think this is just making a process that everybody feels that they're coming to the table and they have a voice, and especially being a member of the city council, I like to know that I have a voice. That's what we're doing.
And one last comment, I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, but it's just a suggestion. A person who have to throw parties and make people feel appreciated is Lisa Jansen, and maybe we can gather our commissioners and whomever to say thank you at least once a year, because I really haven't seen that has been my experience.
So to tie in with you, Madeline, on the training, I think it's December 4th or somewhere in that first weekend of December is the Sonoma State training. If we're going to seat our planning commission by November, but I also hope that we would get an advertisement out, get the press out right now and say, start sending in your applications immediately. Thank you.
No, I just wanted to say that in terms of how this process went, we started off with some real controversy, and then we worked our way through these many months to something new and productive, and I think more in line with democracy, because people are going to have more of a say, more of an idea about what their council members do and how people get on these commissions. There's been a lot of thank yous to the volunteers, and I thank them, but I also think being on a commission is incredibly exciting. And when I was on the Community Services and the Environment Commission, I loved it. I loved getting the packet. I loved reading the packet. I liked thinking about it. I liked being on the city council. I like meeting with the public. It's not a burden. It's for people that are interested in really deciding things and contributing for the town. It's one of the most exciting things you can do. I think that's why we have people that don't want to have term limits, because they want to continue to serve. It's, to be on a new commission and to learn all the new things and to have the staff educating you is really, it's a gift for an individual to get to serve on there. So I think that it is certainly something wonderful that people want to do, but it's definitely a labor of love, and I have no doubt, especially one benefit of all this is that we've shown a tremendous light on the fact that we have these commissions, and now people are going to know how they can get on them, and they can contact us, and they can do the application. So I think that even though it's been trying at times, that this is a great outcome and a good way for people to know more about how to be involved with the city and running the city and to really contribute their talents.
So at this time, I'm going to go out to the public for public comments.
That's right. Then let's go to Paul.
And then we're going to come back for a little more discussion. Thank you for your patience.
Since I'm the only public here,
You
Bob
can have 6
Felder,
minutes.
5th Street, East Sonoma. First of all, I want to thank both staff, especially you, Kathy, and all of the city council for taking this thing on. I was a bit skeptical back in the spring when I saw what was happening, especially to the Planning Commission, but I'm very, very pleased to see that you have gotten to this point, and I think you've done a very, very good job, all of you, to put something out there that I think will work. The only other comment I have is I regard this as such an important thing for the city of Sonoma, and I'm amazed that I'm the only one in the room. But if that, so be it. Thank you for doing your job, and hopefully you'll get some good qualified applicants for these commissions to carry on the job. Thank you.
Thank you. So bringing it back, just have some staff comments.
I just wanted to do comment to Pro Tem Edwards' comment about the applications. Something that we haven't shared too much with you is part of the implementation of the Civic Web. We also purchased a board management module, and as part of that, there will be online applications. So we've got that ready. I've been working with them with this new and improved application, took into your comments regarding wanting some additional information, some resume, and so individuals will be able to go online and apply via the Civic Web portal to this new application process.
And that just reminds me that, with the dates being so spread out before, it would, even people I knew that were interested never quite got the timeline right because it was so sporadic. I think now we have big pushes. It's going to be widespread, and hopefully we'll have healthy pools of people, and I'm excited to see what it all looks like. So as far as you said, you wanted us to all sort of reconsider as a whole body, and if there's any final thoughts.
And I think we heard generally comments, but, we took individual straw votes, and sometimes the world of matrix voting. Now really I'm looking for council as a whole. There's some pieces you may not be individually happy with, but as a whole, based on what we have put together here, I'm looking for a vote to then, and we will move forward and bring back this in an administrative policy.
So should we do this as a motion? All right. Mr. Cook?
Go ahead and make a motion of everything discussed tonight with the straw vote to be approved tonight.
All right.
Second.
Got a first. We got a second. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Harrington?
Aye.
Councilmember Agramonte?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Edwards?
Yes.
Mayor Henley?
Aye.
Thank you.
Ms. City Manager?
Great, and I just want to make a few final comments. I personally just really want to commend the council. This has been a bit of a bumpy ride, but I really think individually and as a group, you have listened to each other. We've all learned together. We've done a lot of sorting on this. These are policy issues. They're not simple. And I just really want to commend each of you for working together as a team and listening, adjusting, agreeing to change. I mean, that is the way public policy is made. And working together as a team, and I think I really just want to commend the 5 of you for that work. I also want to thank our legal team, Veronica and Jeff. There's been a lot of their brains in this and a lot of nuances, and then Rebecca, her survey, just her knowledge of commissions, et cetera. So it has collectively been a team. I think members of the public that have been here and providing their comments as well. So there's a lot of good work for us to do. We'll be bringing back these administrative policies to you. In addition, we will be looking at how do we say thank you? How do we show appreciation? How do we do education? Our commissions really are great grooming grounds for folks to want to be on a council in the future. This is leadership development as well. So I think there's a lot that we can do over the next few years to continue to enhance and embrace our commissioners and our commissions as organizations. So we're going to finish this item now and then move to the Muni Code to make the changes on that, but just really want to thank you all.
All right, so moving on to our final item of the evening. Item 7.4, consideration, discussion, and possible action to introduce and conduct first reading of an ordinance repealing certain provisions in Chapter 2.40 of the Sonoma Municipal Code and amending other sections of the Sonoma Municipal Code pertaining to the composition of and appointments to city commissions. And we will begin with our city attorney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. You have before you this evening an alternate version of the ordinance, different from the one that was in your packet that Rebecca passed out to you at the dais. I will just say that we've already a little bit talked about this in the context of the policies. This alternate version takes for every board and commission and makes the non-qualified voter seats permissive, optional, as opposed to required for each and every of the discussed boards and commissions. And that is the primary difference between the version that was passed out at your dais and the version that you originally had in your packets. There is one decision to be made here, and that has to do with the Planning Commission and appears in Section 2 of the ordinance, and it is the yellow highlighted portion. As the ordinance is currently written, unlike the rest of the boards and commissions, the Planning Commission non-resident seat is not even required to be a Valley resident. I believe, I don't have any objective basis for this belief, but I believe that was to allow the possibility of it being a business owner who was appointed to the Planning Commission as opposed to a resident or a Valley resident. I don't have anything to base that on, however, but that language of Valley resident doesn't currently appear relative to the Planning Commission. To the rest of them, it does. Having said that, the yellow is for you to either leave in or strike out, which essentially says, or a business owner within the city or Sonoma Valley. Staff doesn't have a recommendation as to this since we don't really know why it wasn't a requirement in the previous. Frankly, it could have been somebody who lives in Ukiah under the previous iteration of this, which we thought was sort of weird, but okay. With that, I can answer questions.
Okay, do we have any questions at this point? Mr. Edwards?
So I don't believe we ever had anybody from Ukiah, but we did have a council person who didn't live in town. We won't go there. But, anyhow.
It's for another day.
One of the things we used to talk about is in the sewer district.
Yes.
And that might be a way to go is I can't remember what they call it, the sewer service area or something, and that person would have to live in that area.
So the difficulty tying it to, so sanitary sewer service area has meaning in LAFCO law. There actually is a drawn boundary.
Yeah. If you could keep them in that.
Oh, you could use that.
Person has to be in that.
You could use the school district as an area as well. You could.
I'd prefer to keep the school out of it, but the sanitation district would be ideal, I think.
So right now it just says or Sonoma Valley, which we assume everybody knows what it means. It isn't an actual defined term in the ordinance.
But
it's not.
What about other commissions?
Right, but
Are
you
they
don't
more
want Oakmont
specific?
resident being on our planning.
But I don't know what the sanitation district looks like. I'm on that committee.
It's containable.
Fire district, is that bigger? School, I mean, I think school district is something everyone understands.
So one of the things that we could do that would make it relatively easier for Rebecca is if you want to define what Sonoma Valley means, we could define it by zip code.
Sure.
That's an option, if the council is interested in that. Just to focus the discussion first, though, I think the question relative to the Planning Commission of do you want to expand it to business owners within the city or business owners in the valley, or do you still want to go with the whole idea of the, qualified elector within the city or the valley?
All right, so the question is business owner or resident?
Yeah, it has to be a resident within the sanitation district. I mean, that's.
I agree about the resident part.
Yeah. Well, you'll figure it out when you stick around here long enough, you'll.
Okay.
And I agree.
Okay, so we're taking out this option.
With the sanitary.
We are.
Well, right now we're doing the business owner or resident. So resident, we hear from Ms. Agramonte.
Well, a business owner could be resident.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say resident.
Okay. So I think we have five.
You could have a business owner who lives in Saudi Arabia but happens to own a deli in Sonoma. Are you going to allow that person to be on the commission? No, of course not.
Okay. So I think just in practice, it's just never happened. The language was just non-specific about that issue. So the changes essentially are that in each of the sections, composition of the Planning Commission, Community Services and Environment Commission, etc., they are all essentially have their resident voter requirement, except for a certain number of positions for each committee or commission. We are not suggesting that that change in any way, staying the same as to the number, who could be, quote, a resident of Sonoma Valley. That's current language. If you want us to further be very specific and define what a resident of Sonoma Valley means, you tell us what geographic area you want to include, and we'll make that change before.
Well, what's the border of the sanitation district? Do you have that?
I do.
The reason why that was brought up in the past was because if you had somebody who lived outside the sanitation district that was on the planning commission, they might want to be pushing for a project that would pull the sanitation district out of the district.
Seems reasonable. I will concur with
It's
Mr.
called,
Edwards.
it costs sprawl.
So just
Yeah.
for
Yeah,
the record, this is the map I'm looking at. I'm looking at a map of the sanitation district from the city of Sonoma West.
And Councilmember Harrington, can you briefly describe maybe what is, for members of the public and even myself, what is really included within that in general terms and what is excluded?
Oh my goodness. A lot. There's Sonoma. Town of Sonoma is in there. Goes, I don't know. Gary, can you read this?
If you have it.
It's not labeled with the name of town.
It's not, sorry, I'm just trying to understand.
It's a topographical map.
Okay. Basically encompasses everyone that has it encompasses everyone that has it's not
The north point appears to be Dry Creek. Dry Creek? Does it go up to Dry Creek? Or is it down here? Oh.
That takes the whole county, all those sections.
my mic is on. Oh, there we go.
Oh, yeah, that was right. Three of us. Okay, sorry.
Includes a lot of area.
Halfway up the
Yeah,
valley.
it's very inclusive. It's been used for years.
Sure. I
as
think
a-
that makes sense, especially your
it's
explanation about
called-
sprawl.
I apologize. And it is called the Sonoma Valley Sanitation District.
If you'd like to see it, it is the City of Sonoma Sanitation District map. If you Google that, then you can pull up this map, and there it is. That's probably the best I can describe.
Sonoma Valley County Sanitation District. We just need to know what the real name is to put it in the ordinance.
We can figure that out.
Okay. We'll Sonoma Valley County Sanitation District.
If I might, Madam Mayor, the sanitary sewer Sonoma Valley County Sanitation District covers approximately 4,500 acres and includes the city of Sonoma and incorporated areas of Agua Caliente, Boys Hot Springs, Eldridge, Better Hot Springs, Glen Ellen, Shellaville, Temelec, and Feinberg. Is what it means.
Okay. So with, sorry, speaking to the microphone. So with that then, and a further amendment to the ordinance that is in front of you, every place where it currently says Sonoma Valley, it would say within the Sonoma Valley County Sanitation District. And with that then, unless council wants to talk about the specifics of how many seats may permissibly be non-resident seats, and we didn't change those numbers, those are the same as they are today, then all we did was change the question of them being permissive rather than mandatory.
Question I had was about, which I think that's fine, keep what was in there. So specifically, design review, which, that it's the only commission that actually has a list of required fields because of our status as a certified local government. We have to have certain areas of expertise on this commission. And I mean, maybe this is something to work on in future, but how do we make sure that these, you know, the members reflect the requisite categories, because we have to have people, for example, it's in 2.60.020, but they have to have, shall include persons who have demonstrated special interest in historic preservation, cultural geography, other historic preservation-related discipline, architecture, architectural history. I mean, how would we be able to get it after we appoint all our people and make sure it looks the same?
I think it's
It's, so the answer is that the application process is being modified, I guess, to get to these specific questions, so that when they submit their applications, you will have at least their responses to the questions of what is their knowledge and interest in these areas.
We'll see how it shakes out. All right, so at this point, I'm going to take it out to the public for public comment. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the council for further discussion and action.
Maybe just one other question about the district boundaries. As I listened to Rebecca lay out what was included, what I didn't hear is anything up in the mountains, good time of day, or any folks that live up in the mountains. I'm not clear with those boundaries, if they would be included or not. Those folks may be on septic, may not be included. So I think that is a question. If you don't like the time of day, I think there's a community up there that, I don't know if folks have participated in the past, but with the boundaries, they may not be included. Same thing over on the other side of the hills. You could have, I think Sonoma just is a unique place where there are people who consider themselves part of the valley and part of the city. There are folks that live maybe in some of the hill areas that would not be included within the boundaries that you've discussed.
And so would those be included in our school district, most likely?
They don't know.
There's not a clean map for that, so there might be somewhere, but not that we can access.
Yeah, and I assume that probably because they ran into this problem before, that's why they say Sonoma Valley, and due to ratification appointments, I think sometimes what you leave out is better, so then there's not criteria to come back on someone. So possibly if Sonoma Valley worked, everybody has that definition in their mind somewhat.
So I'm wondering, the Sonoma Valley Citizens Advisory Commission, because it has all the different regions and people from that, I'm curious as to how they have decided what those are. So they have the Sonoma Valley Commission. What's that?
They have to be in the first district.
But it doesn't go all the way up to
It goes
Oakmont,
all the
does
way
it?
up into Santa Rosa, the first district.
For the Citizens Advisory Commission? So we have a representative from Oakmont?
I believe so, yeah. There's got to be, there's, in my history when I was on SBCAT, we had people all the way up the valley.
Who's our person?
That way we could do it. Okay. So, wanting to get this ordinance introduced, and it's sounding like we're not completely wedded or signed on to the idea of the sand district being the boundary. We could say the remaining member may be a resident of Sonoma Valley as defined in the policy. And then when we bring the policy back, we will define what Sonoma Valley means by reference to, I don't know, zip codes or some objective criteria that we can figure out the area that you want to have included.
Sure.
Sounds great.
Okay.
All right.
We're back to Sonoma Valley again.
So I think, at this point, if there's no further discussion,
I'll go ahead and make a motion so moved on what the discussion was.
do we need to be more specific? You know what we're talking about? Cool.
So with that, it would be, if I may, the motion would be to introduce the ordinance of the City Council of Sonoma repealing certain provisions in Chapter 2.4 of the Sonoma Municipal Code and amending other sections of the Sonoma Municipal Code pertaining to the composition and appointments to the city's commissions. As that version was the alternate version passed out on your dais with the added resident of Sonoma Valley as defined by City Council resolution.
Second.
Policy is adopted by resolution.
All right. Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Cook?
Aye.
Councilmember Harrington?
Aye.
Councilmember Agramonte?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Edwards?
Yes.
Mayor Henley?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on, we have council members' reports and comments. Cook?
I have a quick one. I just wanted to talk about the GSA. We had our first meeting, just to keep the colleagues on the council to understand what's going on. So far, it's all just been housekeeping of hiring legal and building, building from the bottom. The good news is it looks like the Sonoma Valley GSA is going to be in alignment with the other two basins to kind of consolidate as far as having the same legal and some of that to try to save administrative costs. So I just want to report on that.
Nice.
Who's it going to be? Do you know who the firm is? No. Oh, okay. I probably don't know them anyway.
Any further council member comments and reports? Seeing none, we'll move to number 9, city manager comments and announcements.
Don't have one, so I'll just pass one that Supervisor Gorin asked us to talk about a community meeting they're holding on immigration policy and services. So in Sonoma, that'll be Thursday, September 14th from 6 to 7:30 at Altamira Middle School. So this will be opportunities for county policies related to immigration and services available regardless of immigration status, a Know Your Rights overview, community service organizations, and legal service providers. So it's basically a policy and services meeting that is being hosted. These are being hosted throughout the county, and this is the one for the Sonoma Valley that's being hosted by Supervisor Gorin. So that's an opportunity. And again, we will have our cannabis policy, our cannabis community workshop here next Monday, and we're going to start that a little later. Instead of 6 o'clock, we're looking at 6:30. That's it. Thank you.
And before we adjourn, I just want to remind everyone that tonight's meeting is dedicated to our dreamers and to those affected by Hurricane Harvey. And with that, we're adjourned.